The wedding cortege was speeding through the city. The driver turned on the incendiary music and honked nonstop. The bride was in anticipation. She was constantly adjusting her veil and fiddling with her bridal bouquet. She was enchanting. Light makeup, blonde curls arranged in a beautiful hairstyle. The veil gave her a mysterious style. A happy smile shone on her face. Emily's heart was ready to jump out of her chest. She couldn't believe that very soon she would be the wife of the most beloved man in the world, her Ryan. Let his parents be unhappy. Let no one believe in their sincere love. Let them say she's having an affair with a rich guy for the sake of a wealthy life and a capital city residency. She doesn't care about gossip. People were just jealous of the kind of love she had with Ryan. It didn't happen very often. The motorcade whizzed past the main registry office and soon pulled out of town. Emily didn't understand and turned to the driver. "Excuse me, but what's going on? Where are you taking me? I'm so confused." "The signing's at noon. Ryan's waiting for me there, so turn around immediately." If this is a joke, it's a very bad one. But the driver's response was cryptic. "It's a surprise. You guys relax. It's a long drive. Better listen to some music." Emily panicked. She started pulling the handles, the doors, but they were locked. She begged the car to stop, but it wouldn't stop. The driver drove over the bumps like a madman and tried not to look in the mirror at how the bride was nervous and began to cry. It was unpleasant for him, but he could not do otherwise. An hour later, the car stopped in the middle of nowhere. The driver turned off the music and muttered, "Get out. We're here." Emily didn't understand a thing. On the edge of an abandoned village, almost on the very marsh, stood a ruined cabin. Stumps everywhere, the scenery ominous. The girl became frightened. "Tell me, are you crazy? Why did you bring me here? I'm going to call Ryan and tell him everything. He's going to have a field day with you. You ruined our wedding. What is this swamp? Take me back." The guys had it. "Don't yell at me. Actually, it was your failed mother-in-law, Barbara, who ordered you to be taken here instead of the registry office and dumped." "Well, you can ask her." Emily was crying and couldn't believe what was happening. "No, it's not true. It can't be. Ryan couldn't. He loves me. I'm going to call him right now," she kept saying. She frantically dialed her fiancé and mother-in-law's numbers, but they were blocked. Then the driver got a message. He read it and handed the phone to Emily. "Here, read it if you don't believe me. I work for Barbara and I can't disobey her. She'll fire me in a heartbeat." The girl read the scary lines. "You've already taken the toad to the swamp where it belongs. Hurry back. There's more work to do." It finally dawned on Emily that it wasn't a silly prank, but the terrible truth. Ryan's mother had decided to mock her, to teach her a lesson, to make her realize that she didn't belong in their family, that she should go back to wherever she came from. So Ryan knew everything, but did nothing to protect Emily from embarrassment. The girl got out of the car, tears filling her eyes, and she stomped out of the car, not knowing what to do next. The driver took pity. "Don't be afraid. Sit here, and I'll come back for you. I just have to report to Barbara first. I'm sorry. It's not my fault. But maybe it's for the best. The missus wouldn't have let you live in peace anyway. Here's your jacket." Emily tore off her veil, sat down on the stump, and wept bitterly. She couldn't get her head around the shame of it all. She couldn't believe that the man who had sworn his love yesterday had betrayed her today. She'd wanted to surprise Ryan at the wedding by telling him she was pregnant. Imagine how happy he'd be, how he'd twirl her around and kiss her. But now what? How to lift a baby by herself? She replayed all the stages of her relationship with Ryan in her head, and couldn't understand at what point he decided to be so mean to her. Emily had grown up in the country. Her father worked as a tractor driver, her mother at the post office. They kept a farm and a vegetable garden, just like everyone else. From the outside, their family was considered exemplary. Rarely happens in the city. When a man in the house does not drink, everyone worked like bees. The house was always tidy. The townspeople envied Emily's mother, Natalia. They said that she was lucky to get married. But few guessed what was really going on in their family. The head of the family, John, was not only strict, stern in character. Everyone was in line. No one dared say a word against him. Whenever Mother sat down to rest for a while, my father would say, "Why are we so relaxed? Go to the barn, check the feed for the calves. Give them some hay. There's so much to do. And you're sitting there like a madam." Mom would pick up right away and go to work in silence. The same was true of Emily reading books, wasting time in the club, going to the disco, generally obscenities. Father also controlled marks at school and grumbled if he saw bad ones. Dad was very stingy with affection. He never hugged or cuddled her. He kept telling Emily, "When you graduate from high school, we'll match you up with Jason. I've already talked to his parents. You'll work on their farm. He's a good guy, he's good at farming, he's not lazy. So I've already arranged your future." Emily tried to resist. "Daddy, I want to study. I don't like Jason at all. He's redheaded and cocky. I want to go to the city and get an education and work there." My father became angry and pounded his fist on the table. "Why do you want to contradict your father? What the hell are you thinking? Who is waiting for you in the city? Your mother spoiled you. You read a lot of nonsense. This conversation is over. I've made up my mind. If I hear about the city again, I'll lock you up so you'll think twice. It's a woman's job to keep house and have children. Do you understand?" Emily was crying, asking her mother to intervene. Natalia shook her head. "What are you doing, daughter? You know what kind of temper your father has, don't you? He won't even listen to me. Don't be so upset. Daddy only wants what's best for you. Maybe it's okay to get married. You'll live with Jason." Emily was a stubborn girl, and she was determined to run away, to go to the city and make her own way. It seemed awful to marry someone she didn't love and live her whole life like her parents. So she did. She worked on the farm, saved up some money, packed a bag for the road. Then her father saw her. He yelled, tried to lock her up, but Emily broke free and took off. And that's when Daddy shouted in anger, "Oh, that's it. Go on then. Just so you know, there are no princes there. If you come back, I'll never let you go home. You're a fool, my daughter. You'll regret it." So Emily found herself in the capital. Right from the train station she went to college. Since childhood she dreamed of becoming a dressmaker. The girl got in without difficulty. She was given a room in a dormitory. It was hard, of course. But girlfriends helped her out, shared everything. Emily's parents were very offended. Other relatives came to the others, carried bags of groceries, supported them, but never to her. That's the kind of temper my dad had. He stopped communicating with her, went on principle. Mom would have come, of course, a couple of times. She, through acquaintances, still passed Emily a transfer. But it's clear that the father did not allow her to visit her daughter. He said she disobeyed and let her do her own thing. After graduation, Emily got a job in a small atelier, rented a modest apartment on the outskirts. In the evenings she read women's novels about love and sighed. Imagined that too will meet a prince and will love her for her ability to sew perfectly. It was a great help to Emily not having money for beautiful clothes. She sewed them herself. So the girl always looked fashionable and interesting. She and Ryan met by chance. Just like in the movies. The guy stood in front of her in the checkout line at the supermarket and dropped his wallet. Emily immediately picked it up and, without thinking, jumped out into the street. The guy was already getting into his car. She held out the wallet. "Ugh, I could barely catch up. Here, you lost it. Take it." The young man was taken aback and began to thank her. "But look at that. It's true. Thank you very much. I'm sure not everyone would have done that. I'm pleasantly surprised. My name's Ryan and you are. Why don't we just call me Ryan?" That's how we met. Ryan offered to drink coffee, gave Emily some brownies. They got to talking. Turns out his parents own a travel agency. The guy visited many places abroad, enthusiastically talked about what he saw, and the girl listened with bated breath. She fell in love with Ryan at first sight. He even looked like the prince of her dreams. Just as confident, smiling. He smelled of masculinity. The affair between them was very passionate. Ryan took her to exhibitions, concerts at the museum, and movies. He opened for Emily another big city, patiently taught her how to behave in society, the rules of etiquette. She absorbed everything like a sponge. Their feelings were mutual. The flowers knew it. The groom whispered such tender words of love to her. He gave her gifts. Everything was going just fine, until Ryan's parents found out about their affair. Barbara was furious. She tried her best to dissuade her son from getting married, to convince him that he could have nothing in common with a girl from the village. A couple of times even appeared in the atelier, and without shyness, embarrassed Emily. The woman was sure that she was spinning Ryan, wanted to register in their luxury apartment and live at their expense. It was impossible to prove to her otherwise. And then one day there was a scandal. Ryan had spent the first night at Emily's house. In the morning they were awakened by a knock on the door. A furious Barbara flew in like a fury and shouted, "You shameless bitch. You've already jumped into bed. Cover yourself up. Standing there in your shirt. Where's my son? The girl got angry. I'm actually at home. I wear what I want, and don't yell at me. And you don't have to yell at me. Ryan and I love each other, and we're still going to be together. Like it or not, Emily hoped Ryan would stand up for her too, but all he did was get dressed in a hurry. And Barbara kept yelling, son, have you forgotten what bedbugs are in here? What have you gotten yourself into? You go home right now and forget about this place. And no, this wedding is not happening. Your father and I didn't raise you to marry that dressmaker. Ryan tried to smooth things over. Mom, why are you so upset? How did you even find me? Don't yell. Calm down, wait. I'll be right down outside, Emily said with tears in her eyes. That's it. So you think this kind of behavior from your mother is normal? I mean, she humiliated me, insulted me, and you don't say a word. So maybe you really don't need me. She was choking with tears, as if a bowl of slop had been poured on her head. The groom began to embrace her tenderly and whispered, what are you, my dear? I don't take it so personally. Yes, Mom is a complicated person. It's hard for her to accept that I want to get married. She's just jealous, you know. Don't worry, she's always like that. And then she'll cool down, calm down. I'll talk to her. We'll definitely get married. I love you, I promise. Don't you believe me? And Emily immediately forgave and believed. Breaking up with Ryan was beyond her. She believed it would work out, but a mother couldn't ruin her son's life. Although, thinking back to her dad, she realized that it could happen. Emily didn't realize she was pregnant right away. Just one day at lunchtime, her partner brought in some fried fish. Emily smelled it, and she was sick to her stomach. Then she bought a test, and everything became clear. The wedding was a week away, and the girl decided that she would present the news right at the ceremony. She really wanted this baby, because he is from her favorite man, Desired. The girl already imagined how they will walk with a stroller, raise a baby together. After all, this is how it should be. A real strong family. And now what? She sobs on a stump. All artificial Escherichia mosquitoes and gnats, frozen, and there's darkness ahead. No wedding, no groom, nothing. When the driver came back for the poor bride, she was completely insane. Her eyes were swollen with tears. Her forehead was burning. The fever must have risen. Emily was shaking. She could barely utter her address, and everything went black in her eyes. She lost consciousness. The girl woke up from the bright light hitting her eyes. She was lying in her bed, covered up to her neck with a blanket, a damp towel on her head, and her friend Lillian leaning next to her. Seeing that Emily had regained consciousness, she exhaled. Well, thank goodness you're awake. Be good, I got a call from the guy who brought you in yesterday. He found the number in your phone. Emily was so scared. You had a high fever. I wanted to call an ambulance, but Oleg told me everything. How you'd been dumped by that bastard Ryan. He and I thought it was just nerves. Found some antipyretics in the medicine cabinet. I had to give you a shot. Then you fell asleep. You slept for 24 hours. I even listened to you breathe, but you really scared me, Emily. The girl remembered everything, and a lump came to her throat again. She'd never cried at anyone before. She was suddenly so angry. What should she do now? She should make an appointment for an abortion before it's too late. How can you and your kid barely make enough money to pay the rent and eat? That asshole Ryan, but we'll find you a better fiancé. You'll see. Emily frowned and shook her head negatively. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to kill the baby. I already love him somehow, don't you see? I won't be able to live like nothing after this. It's okay. I'll survive on my own and raise the baby. And I don't need nobody. Thank you, Lillian, for taking care of me. I was so sick. I don't remember anything at all. Her friend shook her head. Look, why don't you just go home? You said your family isn't poor. Your parents will help, and you'll feel better. Emily frowned again and replied sharply, no way. That's what my father told me. If I brought it to the doorstep in Houston, he wouldn't let me in. You don't know him. There's no way he'll forgive me. He's gonna piss my mom off too, saying she's a whore. Not like I'm gonna have to deal with it myself. You shouldn't have fooled around and listened to fairy tales about love. I thought I'd found a prince. It turned out just like in that fairy tale. Ivanishka drank from the hoof and became a goat. So Ryan turned out to be a goat. Well, that's fine with him. Let him live his life the way he wants. Well, it's time to get up. I have to go to work tomorrow. I've got to get some more food ready. I don't have time to write it out, Lillian marveled. You're a tough cookie, girlfriend. I couldn't do that. Well, I'll run along. You call me if you need anything. The day went on. Emily's soul was smooth and bad. She wanted to cry all the time. It seemed that everyone in the world knew about her shame and squinted, but the girl held on, did not allow herself to cry, and worked hard. She took orders at home, often stayed overtime, tried to earn at least a little dowry for the baby. But as luck would have it, my health in the second trimester began to fail. She had to go to the hospital twice, and the money she earned was spent on food and treatment. The situation was dire. She was about to give birth. The landlady threatened to evict her if she didn't pay. Emily drove to the hospital with a heavy heart. Black thoughts hovered, and the future seemed bleak. The labor was hard, but it was uneventful. A boy was born. Emily named him Sergei, pressed to her breast a native lump of happiness, and cried. She kissed the baby and realized that she would never give her miracle to anyone. A nurse came in to see her. Svetlana, I remember. In the next room, a woman was having a difficult labor, and then everyone was running around like that. Is she all right? She probably didn't survive twins. It was just a huge belly when they wheeled her in on the gurney. The nurse sighed. Unfortunately, the woman in labor died. She had blood problems. They couldn't stop the bleeding. This is the first time in our maternity hospital, and the babies, as luck would have it, are very allergic to formula. Breastfeeding is the only option. My poor grief-stricken husband is looking for a nurse, but it's not so easy. Emily, without hesitation, offered. I can feed the babies if you need me to. I'm in so much pain, there's so much milk. My breasts are hurting and tearing. What good is to be wasted? The nurse was happy and brought the babies. They were a boy and a girl. Emily began to feed them. They sucked greedily on the breast and were full. Then they immediately closed their eyes and fell asleep. The nurse began to thank them. Oh, thank you. It's so good. They were screaming so much, poor ones, they were hungry. They eat a little of the formula. Then they regurgitate everything. It was a disaster, Emily thought. What a grief in the family. Children without a mother, she complained about her life. A couple hours later, a haggard man came into her room, expensively dressed. Emily was well-to-do, but in her eyes she could see the fear of death. Ryan crouched beside her bed and spoke in a husky, low voice. Hello, Emily, my name is Ryan. This is my wife, Ashley. She died in childbirth. And the twins, Stephen and Alice, are also my children. I was told you had a lot of milk, and you fed them. You helped me so much. I'm still in shock about what happened. I can't recover. I have a funeral coming up and allergies. Even the expensive formula doesn't work. Help me, please. I'll pay any money. I need you to be a nanny and a nurturer for my babies. I know you have a son too. It doesn't matter. Maybe you can live with us? I'll give you a comfortable room. Excellent food. Understand, I can't lose my children as well. I understand you have a family. Your husband will be against it. Let him live with us too. It won't be for long. As soon as the children can be fed, I will not burden you. Emily was happy. This option solved all her problems with money and housing. She immediately agreed. I don't have a husband, so there are no obstacles. I agree. Don't worry, there is enough milk for everyone. After the discharge, Emily and her son moved into Ryan's huge mansion. There lived his parents, an elderly couple, Jeffrey and Laura, Ryan himself with his children, and his younger sister, Angela. Emily and her son were allocated a spacious room where they put cribs for the twins, so that it would be convenient for her to take care of them and feed them. At first, it was not easy for the girl to cope with 3 babies at once. She was spinning like a squirrel in a wheel, alternately feeding all 3. As soon as one calmed down, the other began to cry. It was a headache. The family had received the nurse coldly, telling Ryan that it would be better to hire an experienced older nanny, because they didn't know what kind of woman she was or what to expect. But Ryan saw Emily's efforts, and after work he would take the babies from her and take care of them himself. He was very grateful to her for taking care of his children, who were gaining weight on her milk. He paid her correctly and bought everything she needed for her 3 children at once. Emily had a particularly difficult relationship with Ryan's sister, Angela. She behaved arrogantly, showed her discontent with the fact that the nurse sat at the common table, say, her place among the servants. Once Angela even decided to frame the nurse, making a scandal that she had lost an expensive ring from the box. And everyone in the house except Emily is all her own, she shouted. She must have stolen the ring. We should search her room. I'm sure that's where it will be found. Why did you bring her into our house? Is it hard to breastfeed children? And for that kind of money? Emily became upset at such accusations. You know, that's a bit much, she said. I didn't ask for it, I just decided to help the babies. But such rudeness and lies I'm not going to tolerate. Go find a replacement. What if I pack up and leave now that my services are no longer needed? Ryan was outraged and stood up in her defense. Are you out of your mind, Angela? How can you throw around accusations like that? Why are you attacking Emily? I'm sure she didn't take the ring, and I've known you since you were a kid. You're always dropping your jewelry. It's not the first time you've lost it. I'd better search your room now. Apologize to her immediately, and don't let me hear you talking to her like that again. You'd be better off babysitting your nephews instead of clubbing. Ryan quickly found the missing item under his sister's bed and made her apologize to Emily, but Angela harbored an even bigger grudge against the nurse. The thing is, Ryan's late wife Ashley was a close friend of Angela's. After her death, there was no way Angela could accept Emily into the family. She did not believe that she came to the house with good intentions and thought that Emily wanted to surround her brother and marry him. Angela herself was not good with babies. When she picked up Stephen, she'd scream. Alice would jump up and down. It's horrible. Emily's gotten so good with them. She was so good at it. Before a walk, like an experienced soldier, she quickly managed to dress them all one by one. And most importantly, she babbles something, smiles. My father tolerates it. He only grunts, and that was annoying too. How come children don't accept their own aunt? But they're drawn to someone else's girl. After this scandal, Angela quieted down, stopped bothering Emily, but she still looked at her unkindly. But one day, everything changed. Emily was out in the yard with the kids. They were napping in their stroller, and Angela decided to go swimming in the pool. The heat was unbearable. She stood on the edge of the board, stretched deliberately, showing this redneck, her slender figure, and a gorgeous swimsuit, and jumped into the water. But she didn't make the right call. Her leg twisted during the jump, and already in the water a cramp began to cramp her leg, and Angela started to panic and drown. She wasn't a very good swimmer. Emily saw it as she was in clothes, immediately jumped in to save her. She barely managed to pull Ryan's sister onto the grass. Emily rolled her over and started patting her back. Finally, Angela started coughing and spitting out water. She came to her senses and gasped for breath, and realizing what had happened, she suddenly looked at her nanny or mate in a completely different way. Thank you, you saved my life. And I'm sorry for bugging you. I swear I'll never act like that again. Oh my God, you were so clever and skillful. You did. Yes, the guest was really attractive, bright brunette with outstanding forms. Ryan was also nice to her, but nothing more. No matter how hard she tried, he didn't show her any signs of attention, and Lillian was angry. Then one day there was a little party in Ryan's backyard. It was Angela's birthday. Young people were invited. Lillian was invited to join them. Everybody had fun, drank champagne, and then there was dancing and contests. That's when the cunning Lillian decided to act, and Ryan, who was already drunk, was already looking at her with interest. He invited her to a slow dance and hugged her so tenderly, and in the middle of a fast dance, Lillian suddenly twisted her leg, grimaced in pain, and began to fall to the floor. Ryan picked her up in his arms. "Oh, I think I twisted my leg," she mumbled. "Oh my God, it hurts. It's like I broke my leg. How am I going to get home now?" Lillian wailed. "Ryan, I'm so worried. Do you need to lie down? Let me take you to the back guest room, put some ice on it, make it feel better. And if it doesn't, you can stay here tonight and go home tomorrow." Lillian was overjoyed. It had happened just as she'd planned. The two of them never left the party that night, and the affair between Ryan and Lillian began. He adored her, gave her fancy gifts, dressed her like a doll. And of course, she soon moved into his house as his fiancée. The luxurious life quickly corrupted Lillian. She began to act insolent, almost bossy. She even began to tease her friend Emily, who was always running around the house, catering to her, and Ryan giving them all her time. "How many times can you do this?" Lillian resented her. "I'm sick of all this noise. Take the kids to the nursery. And anyway, Ryan and I are getting married soon. Is it right that you're still hanging around here? Why don't you think so? You don't give them any order, you let them do everything. And children need to be kept strict. I think Ryan and I can manage on our own. And 3 kids in the house is a bit much. So why don't you go find an apartment? You've already stayed here, girlfriend." Emily was taken aback by the insolence and retorted, "Aren't you a little conceited, Lillian? Not so long ago you couldn't have dreamed of a life like this, and now you're talking like this." "I wanted to leave, but Ryan asked me to stay and keep working. So you didn't hire me, and you don't get to kick me out. And another thing, don't get your nose so high. It's gonna hurt when you fall. Ryan and I have been friends for years. I could tell him your true intentions. There's no love lost here. So I'd rather you didn't touch me, and I'd rather you didn't touch me. I didn't think you were like that, Lillian." Her ex-girlfriend had a grudge against Emily and was determined to get rid of her as quickly as possible. She decided to set her up by stealing the file. While Ryan wasn't home yet, but on her way out of the office, she was caught in the act by Angela. She'd been watching Lillian for a long time, keeping an eye on this smart girl, just like Emily had once done, trying to figure out what kind of person she was. Her brother had been too quick to marry her. She'd charmed him like she'd bewitched him. Angela literally grabbed her arm and asked, "What are you doing here?" Ryan had warned everyone not to let even the maid clean the place. "Why did you try to steal the file?" "You're some kind of spy. Maybe Ryan's competitors sent you. Come clean, bitch. I'm telling Ryan everything." Lillian turned pale and terrified. She didn't want to lose her fiancé and tried to justify herself. "Please, Angela, I'm sorry. Nobody sent me, and I don't know anything about this business stuff. Honestly, I'm not lying. I was just trying to set Emily up, you know? She doesn't belong in my future family with Ryan, and she's always hanging around. I mean, honestly, I'm jealous, and my blood is churning. I'm afraid that Ryan's gonna change his mind and look at my ex-girlfriend. So I did something stupid. And I'm sorry. You don't say anything to him. I love Ryan and I don't want to lose him." Angela wondered. Maybe she was lying. I mean, she'd wanted Emily to survive just as much as she'd wanted Emily to survive once. How was she better than Lillian? Jealousy sometimes drove people crazy. Angela sat down on the leather couch and patiently began to speak. "You know, I didn't like Emily at first either and tried to set her up, which I'm ashamed of. But she saved me in spite of that. Emily has been with us for a year now, and in that time, believe me, she hasn't even looked at Ben as a woman. They're just friends, nothing more. Look, Lillian. Emily is a close friend of mine now. I consider her a member of our family. You can't find a better nanny for your nephews. So just cut the crap and leave her alone. Okay, if Ben finds out, you're out of here, sweetheart. Understand?" The woman promised she wouldn't hurt again, but that was just an appearance. In reality, Lillian was just laying low, determined to get away sooner or later. Soon Angela fell in love and began dating a man. She was flying, working, getting ready to make sure her fiancé was the best. That day she was going to invite him to visit her. They decided to celebrate this solemn occasion at a restaurant. All the housemates left, and Emily stayed with the children. Time flew quickly. Soon it got dark. She put the children to bed and decided to drink tea in the kitchen and have a snack. Suddenly the front door opened. All the family members walked in, as well as Emily's ex-fiancé Ryan and his parents. Ben beckoned Emily over and introduced her. "Meet Emily, she's my baby's nanny, their nurturer. She's also a great friend and a wonderful person. We consider her a member of our family." "And this?" Emily threw sharply, interrupting him. "That's Ryan, the scoundrel who took me to the swamp instead of the registry office and dumped me there at his mother's behest. One thing I don't understand is, what did he forget here? Or did he find out he had a son? But I'll never let him anywhere near the child of such a mean daddy." Ryan blushed and paled, not knowing what to say. Ben was shocked. "So he is the scoundrel that did this to you? I remember how you suffered," cried, worried. "You've told me that story so many times. Sis, do you know who you've decided to marry? I guess Ryan forgot to tell you something." An argument ensued. Angela demanded an explanation. Her fiancé mumbled something inaudible, and his mother tried to get out of it. "Angela, my dear, don't be nervous. Think about it. How could I allow my only son to get involved with a village girl? I agree, we overdid it with that joke. But we didn't know about the pregnancy, so it's not our fault. It may not even be Ryan's baby, but that's a thing of the past. Why bring it up? The truth is, Ryan only loves you, and I'm happy. A bride like you is a dream come true. We've already talked about everything at the restaurant, haven't we?" Emily only shook her head and retired to the nursery. The groom and his mother were thrown out of the house. Her father threatened not to let them come back to the house. "You don't want to be related to such rascals. I'm not going to let this go. I can see why Ryan went to bed. The clown wanted money from my daughter. What the hell is wrong with you people? You ruined a man's life and you don't repent. I don't want a son-in-law like that, with his rotten black soul." Barbara and Ryan left without a word, humiliated. Ryan was truly ashamed, and his mother swore that she would make Emily's life fun. After the incident, Angela had become even better friends with Emily, and was grateful to her for opening her eyes to her fiancé and his rotten family. After hearing what Emily had been through, Angela sympathized with her. "You're good, you're brave," she marveled. Still decided to have a baby, even though she realized that she herself will have to put him on his feet. "I'm always complaining about something. What a rascal that Ryan is. What love songs did he sing to me? What fancy bouquets did he give me? He said I was his greatest love, that he'd never met anyone like me, and I thought he was in such a hurry to get married." Emily grinned bitterly. cradling her son in her arms. That's what he told me, word for word. And I, stupid me, loved him so devotedly. I believed everything. You have no idea how I felt when I was in the middle of nowhere on my wedding day. I don't know how I got through it. Thanks to your brother. I guess being a mom and taking care of my kids is what saved me. I didn't have time. Kids are like sunshine. They give such a charge of goodness and positivity. The more I took care of them, the faster my soul went away. The black thoughts evaporated. You know, at first I was really mad at Ryan, even hated him. Then I longed desperately for his arms. And now I'm hugging my son, and it feels so good. Jerry and I are a family now. We don't need anyone else. I'm also surprised at myself. I love Jerry, Stephen, and Alice equally. It's like they're all mine. I don't know how. Angela marveled. You're amazing. Honestly, I couldn't do that. You have such a good heart. But you can't give up on your personal happiness. We both managed to fall in love with the same bastard. So be it. Look at my brother. What's wrong with him? There are decent men out there. You and I will be lucky. Barbara was furious. She hated Emily. She'd ruined her wedding to such important people. And the news of her son's baby had made her furious. She was furious. Look, what a rascal. I thought she would run away to her village after such a disgrace. But no, she sneaked into the house and is already commanding as an equal. They believed her. We must make her get out of the way, get out of town, so that she would remember for a long time how to cross Sapinov's path. And then Barbara decided to probe the ground and speak cautiously to Lillian. She felt that this girl was not so simple as she seemed, and could help her. And so she did. Or Lillian herself wanted to get even with her friend and get her thrown out in disgrace. So the two vipers came up with a terrible plan. On that day, there was no sign of trouble. Emily was out with the kids, as usual. Across the street from the mansion was a lovely playground. She was swinging Jerry and Alice on the swings, while Stephen was busy making rings in the sandbox. Lillian was also with her, helping her. It was hard to keep track of 3 fidgeters at once. But the kids asked to bring a big car, so Lillian went to the yard to look for the kids' favorite toy. When she came back, she gasped and screamed. Emily, where's Stephen? He's not in the sandbox. Where did he go? What were you looking at? The woman had a chill inside her. I was looking at the paddles in the bucket. He was just there. She started running, screaming, looking for Stephen. And Lillian immediately, everyone was in a commotion. Until the evening, everyone was looking for the child. It seemed that the whole house turned against Emily. The parents were screaming. What negligence! How could you do that? Pray that nothing happens to our grandson, or we'll put you in jail for a long time. How could you not notice that the child was missing? Emily was in tears. I was swinging the babies on the swing, and Stephen was making puppets. You know how he likes to play in the sand for a long time. He's so quiet, he never takes a step without me. Then Lillian went to get the car, but when she left, Stephen was there, and I fixed his cap. I don't know where he could have gone. It must have been stolen. I'm sorry, I don't know how it happened. Ben paced back and forth, calling the police several times, wondering who could have kidnapped the baby. Why, for ransom? Then why hasn't anyone called yet? Angela had been watching everyone in the meantime. She noticed that Lillian was overacting in public, sobbing, wringing her hands, and criticizing Emily more loudly than anyone else. It's strange, because she'd been so cool with the kids. She's just been playing with them for show, and that was when Ben was at home. But now she was suddenly so emotional. The girl gestured Ben away and shared her suspicions with him. Brother, listen, you're all mad at Emily. She's been working for us for a year, and she's never had an accident. I mean, you see how she's got her hands full with the kids. I think Lillian's behind this. But take your rose-colored glasses off, take a closer look. She's an actress, and she's not a very good actress. And then Stephen disappeared just as Lillian was leaving the set. So she wouldn't be suspected. She's not as wonderful as you think she is. Do you know she's been living in your office, trying to steal documents and blame it on Emily, and now this terrible incident. But Ben didn't believe it. Angela, why are you lumping everything together? Don't make a monster out of Lillian. She loves me, and we're getting married soon. But why steal Stephen? That's ridiculous. And how would she get it back if she never left the mansion? The girl pressed her lips together. All right, you may not believe me, but I'll prove I'm right. Can I have your chauffeur to help me and follow her carefully? I'm sure I'll find out something. Just do what you want. Out of my way. I'm thinking, who took my son and how do we find him? We've searched 2 blocks and there's no son anywhere. We've looked under every bush, in every crevice. Then he must have been stolen. There were 100 of them at the Smith mansion. Barbara carried the Kennedy boy in her arms, trying to keep him distracted and calm, and her husband read it. Galka the opal died. Then she brought someone else's baby home with her. What does it all mean? God, I'm going crazy with this screaming. Give me the boy, he's all twitchy. Gregory put the baby in a soft chair and left him alone, handing him a beautiful brightly colored box. Stephen calmed down a little and looked at it with interest. Barbara ranted. Grisha, you head, shut up at last. How I got rid of small children. This is Stephen, the son of Ben Rounds. He also has a sister, Angela. He's a lovely boy, isn't he? I bought him some vegetable formula, baby food. I'll go and open it. We should feed him. He's hungry, isn't he? Gregory resented it. This is all very entertaining. But what's a boy doing in our house? Did you steal him? I don't think Rounds would have given him to you willingly. You need to explain this to me right now. What are you getting our family into? Barbara tried to explain. Yes, Gregory, while our unfulfilled daughter-in-law was distracted, I quietly grabbed the boy and ran. He didn't realize it at first. He started yelling in the car. It's revenge. Gregory, have that branch kicked out of the rich house. She's ruined our wedding with her confessions. And our son's on his own again. We'll never be able to separate him like this. Enough, the kid will be kicked out. The babysitter will be back as soon as that happens. Don't worry. He'll stay with us for a while. We're not hurting him. I bought a whole bag of toys and sweets. My husband resented it. Barbara, you're a fool. Yeah, these big businessmen are probably all over town, with the police looking for Stephen. She's done something wrong. What if they find him here and we go to jail? Barbara just snorted. Why would we go to jail? I'll say that Lillian brought the baby to me and asked me to take care of it, and she went off on some errands. That's all. I'll give the baby to Round's fiancé, and she'll bring it back and make up a story about how and where she found it. Then her fiancé Ben will be grateful to her for the rest of his life for saving the baby, and they'll be married. So everyone is better off for this little adventure. Barbara opened a can of mashed potatoes and began to feed Stephen. Here's to Daddy. Here's to Mommy, that's a good boy. You're eating with gusto. You're gonna grow up big. An hour later, Lillian arrived at the mansion. The boy was already asleep. She became Chatterton. Barbara, everything went perfectly. Our plan worked. They're all over Emily, trying to kick her out. How's Stephen sleeping? Oh, good. I hope the babysitter gets kicked out tomorrow and I can take the boy back. I can't stand the sight of Ben. He's so upset. But when I give him his son back, he'll worship me. I'm telling you. The women didn't even realize they were being watched through the window. Angela prepared herself, armed with binoculars, and watched Barbara put the baby to bed. Ryan pulled up in front of the house. Angela rushed over to him, grabbed him by the pecs, and started shaking him. You rascal, you've decided to take revenge on me by kidnapping my nephew. But I'll arrange it for you now. Teacher, I'm calling the police right now, and both your mother and that woman will go to jail for kidnapping. Ryan slammed his eyes shut. He didn't understand a thing. Angela, wake up. What kid? What kidnapping? I was on a business trip, just got back. Who kidnapped? Who? The girl saw he wasn't lying, so she told everything. Ryan got really scared. Jesus, Mom, what have you done? You don't need the police. I'm going to get Stephen now and give him back. I'm sorry, please. I really didn't know. Wait here, don't call anywhere. I'll be quick. He had already managed to call his brother, and he rushed to get his son. Ryan entered the house, and without discernment, went to his mother's bedroom. Indeed, there was a baby sniffling peacefully on the bed. The boy quietly took him in his arms and began to leave. Barbara ran after him. Ryan, what are you doing? You screwed up our whole plan. I barely got that screamer to sleep. That's the way to do it. I'll tell you all about it later. Too late, Mom, you've made a mess of things. We're all going to jail now. Step aside. Let me pass. We have to get the boy back before Angela calls the police. Just then, Ben burst into the house. Stephen woke up, rubbing his eyes, and wanted to cry, but he saw his daddy and smiled. Immediately, he pulled his arms to him. The man hugged his son tightly and whispered, Jesus, alive, thank God. Everything will be all right now. Don't be afraid, son, Daddy is near. Angela filmed everything on her phone and said, That's it. Lovebirds, you've been caught. What's up, Lillian? I wanted to set my friend up again, but you're a bitch. Now I hope my brother realizes who he wanted to be with, and I think you belong with Ryan. You two deserve each other. One left his bride in the middle of nowhere on her wedding day. The other kidnapped the son he loved. I can't get my head around that." Ben didn't want to scare his son and said dryly, "Be warned, I won't let it go. I'll wipe you off the face of the earth, and you, Lillian, get out of my house, and I'll deal with you too." Barbara tried to get out of it. "Ben, you've got it all wrong. This has nothing to do with us at all. It's your fiancé's idea. She brought Stephen to me, asked me to keep an eye on him, and what do? I love kids. We were playing with him, and he ate and fell asleep. Well, I'm sorry, it was a stupid situation." Ben took his son home. Lillian kicked him out, and his father, when he found out about it, was so angry that he ruined the family in just 2 months, filed a bunch of lawsuits through the courts and sent them out into the world. They became destitute. All their accounts were frozen. The house went under the hammer for debt. Ryan couldn't communicate with his mother anymore either. She had ruined his whole life without realizing it. He went along with it. The guy came to Ben's house several times, asked for forgiveness, and then went far north to earn money, cutting off all relations with his mother. Barbara's husband went blind and 6 months later died of a heart attack. A bent, money-hungry, envious woman walked the streets like a lost woman begging for alms. She had to go to work part-time as a cleaner, scrubbing floors in a store. It was so humiliating for her. In just over a year, Barbara was unrecognizable. She went from being a businessman's wife to a pathetic old woman, and deservedly so. She'd brought so much grief to so many people and never repented. Surprisingly, only after the kidnapping of his son Ben suddenly looked at Emily differently, as if for the first time he noticed her as a woman. He began to realize that he couldn't find a better wife and mother for his children. He loved Jerry as much as he loved his own children, and had long considered him his own. Emily's birthday was approaching, and Ben decided to confess his feelings to her and propose. Emily slept sweetly and soundly. Amazingly, the babies didn't wake up once. That rarely happened. The woman woke up when the sun was already shining through the window. She jumped up. How could it be? How could she have overslept? After all, it was long past the baby's mealtime. And how quiet was the nursery. Strange. She rushed to the crib. But the babies weren't there. Emily rubbed her eyes, threw on her robe, and was about to run out into the hallway when the door opened and Ben entered the room. He was holding a tray with 2 cups of coffee and croissants on it. He looked conspiratorial. The woman was taken aback. Ben had never entered without knocking before. She began to fix her hair. She was embarrassed that he had caught her like this, but Ben said, "Good morning, birthday girl. Calm down, I can see the panic in your eyes. The kids are going to be with Angela and my parents today. You go to bed. Here's your breakfast. I made it myself with cinnamon and licorice. I hope you like it." Emily glowed. Ben had never paid her any attention before. It felt so good. She'd forgotten the last time she'd enjoyed breakfast in bed. Usually she was up from early in the morning. "Thank you, Ben. No one's ever said hello like that before. I forgot it was my birthday." "It's not a birthday greeting. It's just something to get you in the mood. Let's get some breakfast and go make magic for the best woman in the world. I want you to remember this day as the best and the happiest. So get ready. I'm waiting for you downstairs." The woman's heart was ready to jump out of her chest. She exulted. "Oh my God, did I really hear that? Ben called me the best woman ever. Did he finally feel for me the way I've felt for him for a long time? I can't believe it." Emily really did remember that day for a long time. First they went to the spa. There she was treated by skillful professionals. 2 hours later she was beautiful. Ben admired her. She was so good, and how had he never noticed it before? Next on the agenda was a pleasure boat ride. Emily squealed with delight and cheered like a child. It had been a long time since she'd had such a good time. And in the evening they found themselves in an expensive restaurant. A table had already been reserved there. The lovers dined, drank wine, and danced. It was time for the most important gift. The man took out a beautiful velvet box, put a ring on Emily's finger, and whispered, "My beautiful nanny." "Emily, I don't know how to speak beautifully, but I want to say the most important thing. Be my wife. I can't imagine my house without you. The kids call you mommy every so often. After Jerry, I think you and I are going to make a great family." Emily threw herself into his arms and said, "Yes." A month later, they had a beautiful, lavish wedding. It was in all the newspapers. The pictures showed the whole family together, happy Emily in a white dress, understanding Ben, his parents, his sister, and all 3 kids. The headlines trumpeted, Ben Rounds and his family are happy together. Lillian sang cheap wine and tore the newspaper to pieces, stomping on it in her rented room. She was so disappointed that Emily had beaten her to the punch and Ben had married her, and she was out of the picture. After her luxurious life in the expensive mansion, she couldn't bear to be in that stuffy poor room. Even the walls seemed to crush her. She had dreamed of finding a rich husband and living the good life. But why should Emily be the lucky one, and not her? Envy and anger ate away at Lillian's soul. The day after the celebration at the restaurant, Ben said decisively, "All right, Ashley, we're all going to pack up and go to the village to meet your parents. You've never talked about them. You never even invited them to the wedding." That was wrong. They've never even seen their grandson. What's wrong with that? Emily wanted to meet her father-in-law. Emily even turned pale and tried to justify herself. "Don't you understand? I have a lot of resentment towards my dad. He was always too strict. He didn't understand me. He wanted to marry me without love. I'm very resentful of him. I don't think it's a good idea to go." But her husband wouldn't listen to anything. "Darling, you are no longer a child." The wife reluctantly packed her things to leave her husband. But hearing the voices of her husband and mother-in-law, she hid. Carol sat in the stall at her workplace and fell asleep due to the change in weather. She wanted to sleep all the time. The bell rang and a customer appeared near the window. "A scone, please, and 2 poppy seed muffins," the man asked. Carol handed him the purchases and sat back in her seat. Despite such a simple job, she would rather have something physical than sit like this all day, pecking her nose. The customers were good in the morning and from 3 o'clock on, but the rest of the time the woman entertained herself with embroidery or reading books. Carol remembered the 5 years of hard study she had spent at the institute, and now, years later, it turned out that higher education had no meaning for her. After studying, the girl went to work as an engineer at a factory. It closed after 3 years. Carol was disappointed in her future for several years and realized that only in big cities education mattered. The provinces only needed teachers, and for jobs that were distributed in advance to family and friends. Carol didn't stop there. She tried a change of specialty. She finished courses and became a landscape designer. During that period, she met her husband, Daniel. She had high hopes then, which again were not realized. There were few people in the city who were willing to pay specialists to design landscaping projects for plots and gardens. The company promised Carol that they would have projects from the city and possibly the regional administration. But time passed, and apart from the occasional order, nothing happened. Carol urged Daniel to go with her to the regional city, but her fiancé was strongly attached to his parents and didn't want to live in the city. So at almost 32, it seemed to Carol that her life was over. Yes, she married Daniel. They sold Carol's grandmother's old house, added the money given to them as a wedding gift, and took out a loan in her husband's name, as Carol had no official job at the time. Carol's husband did not have a college degree and did not particularly aspire to one. He worked in a warehouse where his mother had gotten him a job many years ago through her connections. Carol tried many things. She even worked at school. But since the girl was adamantly opposed to the system that killed children in schools, she didn't last long there. "If someone had told me that I would just waste 5 years of my life," she sighed and put the book aside, "I wouldn't have studied anywhere at all. You can learn everything online now." As a child, Carol loved inventing things. Her father taught high school drafting and her mother worked as a doctor. Her parents decided that engineering education would suit Carol, and the girl herself entered the institute with high hopes. Carol dreamed of getting some experience and entering graduate school in a big city, but she quickly had to come back down to earth. She didn't want to stay to teach at the institute. She was interested in practicing. But her parents didn't have the money for her to go where the research centers were located, and counting on a grant at her own institute was pointless because of the low salaries of teachers for many years. In the end, never having become an inventor, she sat in a stall and did not understand what to do next. After a 15 job at the store, Carol found a rather promising place. Of course, the salary wasn't great, but the 8 to 4 schedule with Sunday off suited her. Carol, hi, came from the other side of the window. How are you doing? Why are you so sad? Hi, Kyle, she sighed. What's there to be happy about? I'll probably never get out of this hole. But you know, it depends on how you look at it, Carol's former classmate replied seriously. The glass is half full or empty. That's something only you can determine. Sometimes Carol envied Kyle. He was a head saint in high school too. His family was very poor. His alcoholic father had drained his mother until he died. And in 11th grade, the kid's mother fell and was left disabled. Kyle's 2 older sisters left for more promising places, and he stayed to look after Alina Alexeyevna. Kyle, like a mom, thoughtfully asked Carol, "Take her a visitor." "You will." "Thank you." He took his bread and a small package from Carol. "Let's keep our spirits up, or you'll find happiness around the corner and you won't be ready for it." "I wish to God I could say that," sighed her classmate. "I'll probably be carried out of this stall." The meeting with Konstantin upset Carol even more, and beat, and so forever. But even earlier, Carol decided for the umpteenth time to talk to her husband today. She was sure he wouldn't agree to move from here to somewhere else. Still, the woman decided to give it a try. "What do I want?" she asked herself aloud. "But I'll start with a simple one. Do I want a lot of money?" Unequivocally, no. I want enough so that I don't have to think about not having a penny for bread in a week. I do not need an expensive car or a palace in principle. I need money as a tool for living, not for power and manipulating others. Let's move on. Family. I want children madly. I don't think there's any point in dragging it out any longer. Daniel and I have been married for about 5 years now. We've had enough to live for ourselves. The more Carol reasoned, the more she felt that her problem wasn't even the job. It was a matter of fulfillment. She was suffering from the fact that she couldn't find herself on the outside. Carol saw that she was not living her life. She wasn't realizing her potential at all. "It's your own fault," her mother-in-law often reprimanded her. "If you'd worked at school, everything would have been fine. But no, everyone's happy, but you're not. You're special." Carol put the book aside and surfed the internet again. She loved videos about cold core, single crystal synthesis, and other things that were recognized as pseudoscience. Although it had been proven more than once that it all worked in practice, people's consciousness hadn't yet reached those types of energy. If only we had such a device, we wouldn't need to build dangerous nuclear power plants. A little box in every yard and everyone would have electricity, Carol whispered, and began to draw something on the paper. "Give me 2 bottles of Budweiser beer." Carol's slightly gruff voice brought Carol back to her senses. She handed over the bread, smiled crookedly. She didn't feel like saying anything back when the bread was already cheaper. The man didn't wait for the saleswoman's reaction and went into action himself. "You've got a nerve. All their own. And bread costs as much as abroad." Carol shrugged her shoulders. She didn't want to get into a discussion. She couldn't influence the pricing in any way. And it was not only pointless, but even dangerous to take all the blame. The customer left, but Carol's mood had completely soured. She started to go home. It was an hour before the stall closed. Carol felt sad again. She dialed her husband. "Hi. How are you doing?" she asked Daniel. "Will you be there today as usual?" "No, I'll be late, maybe a couple hours," he sighed. "There's a shipment coming in late today, and we have to take it in." Carol wasn't in much of a mood to go home. Everything was boring. If she could get away from this life, she'd do it. Tangled in her coat. Despite the wind, she still decided to walk. The beginning of April was cold. There was still snow in some places. Carol walked toward the river. Her hands were cold, but for some reason she was drawn there. The woman approached the bank. Carol suddenly shuddered. "Are you doing something?" glaring at him with her eyes. Thinking, he answered calmly. See, he pointed with his hand at the ice. Why does it float? Well, because water expands when it freezes and becomes lighter. Carol answered at once. Why does it expand? He sighed. No one knows. No one has been able to see how water molecules rearrange themselves into a crystalline structure. Just a moment, and the water in front of us is no longer water, but ice. Is this a matter of life and death for you? Carol tried to make a joke. Yes, Kyle answered seriously. I've been working on an invention for several years now. I want to create a substance that would restore the structure of Mom's hip bone. What does ice have to do with it? Carol couldn't understand. You want to put it on the sore spot? No, I want a liquid that can expand when it hits the bone tissue, and thus create a porous bone structure. After my mom's fracture, all of her bones are flattened. Honestly, I can't even imagine how that would be possible, Carol thought. If you inject this fluid into the muscle, the body temperature will prevent it from changing structure. Therefore, this fluid in its original state must exist at a higher temperature. His eyes lit up. I've already gotten it, but I don't have time to inject it yet. It's already getting viscous in the syringe. You amaze me, Carol whispered in amazement. But I still don't understand how it can be done. The idea is this: I inject a certain substance, and at body temperature it becomes viscous and expands. I need to inject it near the problem bone. Then this substance will lift the bone tissue a little bit and keep it that way for a certain period of time. The bone tissue regenerates quickly and a new healthy area appears. About a week to 2 weeks later, the substance breaks down into water and other safe elements. But if you look at it all theoretically, Carol lit up, then you need an inhibitor to slow down the solidification of this substance ahead of time. Although I still don't believe it can be done. The conversation with Kyle was a real jolt to the woman. What Kyle was doing seemed more miraculous than real to her. But let's say such a substance existed and could be administered. She pondered on the way home. How would it determine that it needed to work on bone and not other tissue? Carol got home and began to do her chores. But Kyle and his idea never left her mind. She was grasping at it like a straw, you might say. It had been so long since Carol's mind had solved such complex problems that the woman had taken a keen interest in the whole thing. Late in the afternoon, her husband returned. Carol's eyes were burning. She wanted to tell him everything. Daniel, do you remember my classmate Kyle? She spoke quickly. Well, he's doing something so interesting right now. He wants to invent a drug to cure his mother. What a load of crap. Daniel made a disgruntled face. He's had her for over 10 years with a fractured femoral neck. People can't get up. She's gonna die, you idiot. Why is he an idiot? The wife took offense. Maybe he can do something. Many inventions were created by amateurs, not professionals. Because he's an idiot. The man said unkindly. I've seen your Kyle. It's written all over his face that he's a worthless man. I don't agree with you, the wife countered. Kyle doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, he works. He's a decent man. He's lazy. Daniel waved his hand. Don't spoil the mood. I don't want to talk about this garbage. Daniel sat down at the table. Not that Daniel was any different from anyone else, but in his mind he was a real man. Of course, everyone in the neighborhood knew that Kyle was taking care of his mother. Many people found such things surprising, but didn't like it. Daniel himself had also lived across town with his mother before he got married. Carol and Daniel were able to buy a home inexpensively in this area of town that was considered the most up and coming. Daniel, let's go somewhere else. Carol couldn't take it anymore. I can't live here anymore. I'm not leaving my mother, I warned you right away, he replied. Maybe she'll move in with us later too. Carol tried again. No, she wants to stay here. And Carol, well, don't you start. Go to work at the school, and your ardor will diminish immediately. In the beginning of their acquaintance, Carol felt like she was behind Daniel like a stone wall. But after a few years, she began to notice that her husband was not inclined to talk openly or to change. He was a very closed, conservative man, even though he didn't realize it. Carol suffered greatly from this. She could be called sociable, and at first the girl was sure that she could find a common language with Daniel. But time showed that she wouldn't. "Okay, Daniel, if you don't want to leave here, then let's plan a baby. Where else can we wait?" she raged. "That's something you and I will discuss later," he replied coldly. "Carol, will you let me have a quiet evening? I'm tired." There was nothing left for Carol to do but forget everything and do some business. How often do young people fall in love? They think their love will last forever. But time passes, and both begin to notice that they have not chosen the most suitable partner. And it becomes scary. Why is it so? Everything was great in the beginning. Unfortunately, each of us enters marriage not with a real person, but with our own expectations. So when our expectations are not met, we begin to see our partner as he or she really is. And of course, the reality is very different from the desired reality. Someone begins to work on himself, and the relationship improves, or people break up. But such a minority. The rest try their best to maintain the standards imposed on them and go on with their lives. That's what Carol thought, that now she would have to die with Daniel on the same day. Carol went to sleep again, such an impenetrable darkness enveloping her. She cast a glance at her husband and shuddered. He seemed foreign and distant to her. The next day was warmer. Carol didn't even turn on the heater. It began as it always did, first the receiving of goods, and then the customers crowded around her stall. Carol tried to smile at them, but she wasn't in the mood. She saw a picture in front of her that she had taken a wrong turn. Her parents didn't get involved in her daughter's life, and she couldn't talk to them. They, too, held views that were considered normal in society. By the end of the day, Carol realized that she was dying to talk to Kyle. But he was coming in every other day for bread. He wasn't officially working anywhere. He couldn't leave his mother all day. He worked part-time, did odd jobs, hired out to neighbors. None of his older sisters wanted to take on such a burden. So the man got by as best he could. The phone rang. Daniel said he was staying at his mother's house tonight. Carol knew the routine very well. Daniel had a difficult temper. He couldn't calm down for a long time, so after such conversations with his wife, he often spent the night at his mother's house, so as not to bring the matter to conflict. Perhaps it was Carol's own fault. If she caught fire, she couldn't stop until she got some result. And since it seemed to the woman that her happiness depended on moving to another city, or having a baby, she wanted to see this through to the end. "All right," the wife replied through tears. "Daniel," as she wanted to say something to him but refrained. "I'll miss you." It had been a lonely evening. It drove Carol further into a state of hopelessness. She felt like tearing up and throwing up. Maybe get a job in the area. An idea came to her mind. I won't be able to take it anytime soon. Daniel will never leave his mother. Daniel's father had died a year and a half ago. Now he was all the more reluctant to even think about another city. He was fine here. His mother was alone and needed looking after. Only unlike Kyle, Daniel felt like he was acting like a grown man. "I'm doing something wrong," Carol sighed. "It's like I'm walking in a vicious circle. There's no way out." It seemed she saw a dead end in every area of her life. The only thing that occurred to her then was to take a few days off for a few days off for a few days and just not think about anything. The next day was Friday, and the woman called the landlord first thing in the morning. He agreed to give her a couple days. Carol rejoiced when she saw her classmate. "But how are you doing? How are your experiments going?" "Well, some things are," he reported cheerfully. "Honestly, there isn't enough time." "So shall we go see it?" He winked cheerfully at his guest. "I'll warn you right away, my place is a mess." They entered the workshop. Yes, it was a place of sheer chaos, but it made Carol's blood boil. How happy was she to see all those scattered tools, flasks, coasters, checks, bits of different metals. Wow, her eyes lit up. Kyle, you've got a real lab in here. I'm the one with the mess right now. And when I start the process, it's sterile clean here on the table. The man led her over to a very strange setup. There were some tubes connected there, vessels through which some kind of gas was apparently being pumped. And how does all this work, she asked in amazement. Is it something organic? Well, of course, no hydrocarbons around here. Kyle smiled and began to explain to Carol how his device worked. But that was only the first part. The main part was the substance it produced. That was where all the value was. Have you tried injecting your mom with it yet? Carol asked cautiously. Carol was afraid. I'm scared too, he sighed. He had recently picked up 2 stray dogs with broken paws. So now I'm treating them. Wow, caught her guest's breath. It's working. She kept her eyes on her host. Yes, he sighed. But I want to add one more component. My intuition tells me the effectiveness might increase that way. Kyle, have you told your mom about your experiments? Carol inquired. She wants to try it, he replied seriously. Mom is already very tired of her disability. I feel very sorry for her, too. Yes, the case is too delicate. There are great risks. Little chance of anything? Maybe such a drug would work for dogs, but not for humans, sighed a classmate. That's the problem, Kyle supported her. It's not like I'm a scientist. I don't have that kind of knowledge. Sure, I've reread tons of books, even consulted with some experts. But I can't say out loud that it works. Kyle. Well, if it does work, what then? Curiosity was shared by Carol. But I'm not Henry Ford. I don't have a wife, Clara, who supported him no matter what. And the light saw the world's first automobile, the man sighed. But if it does come out that way, I'll be happy for those people who will have the opportunity to have real bones instead of titanium bones. So what? A lot of handicapped people will walk normally. Carol walked home. She wanted to cry and rejoice at the same time. Why cry? Because people like Kyle never asked for anything from anyone. They were altruistic and tried to bring something to people at the expense of themselves. Well, joy was a natural feeling from the fact that among the heart-centered people were these fools like her classmate. Daniel and his kind would never put such simpletons in line with themselves. It would be beneath their dignity. But it was Kyle, not him, who sought to improve the lives of all mankind. He used his last dime to buy the necessary drugs, assembling rig after rig until he got exactly what he wanted. These are the kind of people who just move science forward. They're real men with pumped-up brains, not bodies. The latter didn't matter much, except for the physical labor. There were many things going through Carol's mind. She, too, wanted to quit everything and do something, to invest her energies, to dream that something would work out, instead of sitting in her stall and being angry at life. Carol was in no mood at all, so she didn't call her husband. She felt a strong resentment toward him. Compared to Kyle, he looked retarded. His outlook on life showed that he didn't have much intelligence in him. She distracted herself with household chores. Her husband came home from work in the evening. He was kind of wooden. Daniel, is something wrong? His wife walked up to him. You look exhausted. Yeah, there was trouble at work today, he tossed off and went into the other room. Carol didn't bother to bother him, but there was pain in her soul again. Daniel seemed like a complete stranger to her. The weekend flew by quickly and Carol went back to work. The morning didn't go well. First, some grandfather got into a fight with her, always telling her that she'd stolen from him. In his opinion, she should have taken half as much bread from him. Grandpa, do I have to add the rest of you out of my own pocket? Carol answered him. "You're smoking everyone here," yelled an old man outside the stall. "Whatever price you want, that's what you charge." "Old age is no fun," said an elderly woman nearby. "It takes away everything, even your mind." The grandfather kept yelling, threatening to report him to the police when the saleswoman stopped paying attention to him. "Hello, Carol," the longtime acquaintance approached the stall with a wry smile. She had no idea how much Carol hated her, and the feeling was mutual. "Hello, Lucy," the woman replied calmly. You, as always, she did not want to prolong the conversation. She and Lucy had once worked together at the school. The latter stayed there, worked her way up to head teacher, and thought she had become a celestial. Well, since Carol was openly opposed to the school system, she was laughed at by the likes of Lucy. They made a good profit at the school, with some of the curtain money going into their pockets. And the rates for expensive gifts were set at the beginning of the school year. "I heard you and Daniel divorced." Lucy lowered her voice. "Why? Were they so out of character?" "What the hell is that?" Carol's eyes flashed. "We're fine, we're still together. But that chick he keeps driving around in his car is nothing like you." Lucy laughed out loud. "I heard it was someone from his work. It's not like his mom gave him a girl." "Is there anything else you need? Or is that it?" Carol tossed it to her. "Sorry, I got a lot of work to do." "Yeah," she said dismissively. "The truth hurts." She grabbed the bag of muffins and walked away. Of course, Lucy's words had hurt Carol. She trusted her husband. Yes, he was occasionally late for work, but that didn't mean anything. "Idiot," Carol whispered. "You'd better look at yourself. Stolen money. Daddy's pockets are howling." No matter how much Carol urged herself not to think about the incident, all sorts of thoughts popped into her head. Meanwhile, Daniel was having a serious conversation. It was break time, and he went into the back room to see Lenora. The woman pretended not to pay attention to him. Daniel approached her, wanting to hug her. "Don't touch me." She waved him away. "I told you it's over between us." "Len, stop it." "I love you," he said in a gentle voice. "I broke up with my ex," she sobbed. "Are you still living with her?" "I just don't know how to file for divorce so that I can get the house back. I paid the loan on it," the man sighed. "You wouldn't even listen to me yesterday," Lenora said. "I don't care, the mistress didn't want to reconcile. You promised me that she wouldn't be in my life anymore." She sobbed. "I can tell you that again," he confirmed. "You give me time." When Daniel had met Carol, he'd thought he'd found his ideal. The girl seemed smart, reliable. Of course, the young man had serious relationships before her, but he had not yet decided to marry. Daniel always considered himself one of the most real men. When he was young, he enthusiastically pumped his muscles. In his opinion, he wasn't stupid either. In short, the perfect man. After a year of married life, Carol and her high-mindedness began to annoy him. Daniel didn't want to waste his time with such nonsense. All this talk about life, about how to make it better for everyone. It wasn't for him. Well, and then, about 3 years later, when Carol had developed a bent on moving to the city, the young man finally realized that he'd done something wrong. It wasn't Daniel's policy to admit his mistakes. A real man couldn't make mistakes. But a couple more months passed, and Daniel clearly realized that something had to be done. He'd had his eye on one at work a long time ago. Lenora was living with Wade at the time. She was a beautiful and hard-working woman, so Daniel began to pursue her. They hit it first. Daniel had a car, so it was easy. Then Daniel started making jealous scenes to get his lover to break up with her roommate. Basically nothing new. A word or two about Daniel's mother. It's not that Tracy hated Carol. No, it's just that she'd always felt she was the wrong kind of wife for Daniel. Carol wasn't exactly a looker. Her overly skinny body and salt black hair didn't evoke the emotions that usually came from seeing a beautiful woman. And when Tracy learned that her son was looking at Lenora, she didn't mind at all. Carol's fate had been decided behind her back. She'd hoped she and her husband would go to the big city and have children. Lenora clung to her lover, wanting certainty. And for that, Daniel had to go through with the divorce. The sooner the better. The man himself couldn't stand his wife anymore either. She had become repugnant to him. Daniel, in the evening, Carol came up to him and said, "I want to talk to you." She was very worried. "Not tonight," he objected immediately. "Carol, may I? Did you get any sleep tonight? I still can't get over last night." "Daniel, I can't take it anymore," she shouted. "You're not paying attention to me. What's the matter?" "It's nothing," he threw coldly. "I'm tired. It's not like I'm a robot. I can't take a day off on a whim like you do." "Do you love me?" the wife asked provocatively. "Carol, answer me. Did you decide to finish me off today?" After all, jumped the husband out of bed and began to dress. "Where are you going?" Carol rushed to him in tears. "To my mother's, at least to sleep at her place. She doesn't nag me as much as you do." He said goodbye and disappeared into the yard. During the night, Carol was restless. The next day in the evening, she decided to drive to her husband's work. She waited till morning. It was gray, unkind. The work was hard. There weren't many people because it was raining. Carol closed her stall and hailed a cab. She tangled herself in her raincoat and waited. Daniel worked until 6. His wife waited for him, stood nearby and watched as her husband came out of the gate, followed by some strange woman. She sat in the front seat and began kissing him passionately. Carol couldn't move. She sat down and cried loudly. The car had long since left and she still couldn't get up. "Daniel," she called her husband an hour later, "we need to have a serious talk with you. I've seen you. So stop making a fool of me." Her husband was silent, disconnecting the phone. Carol tried many more times to dial him, but he blocked her number. "Bastard," Carol screamed. "What a coward you turned out to be. You've never been a real man, only lip service, just shaking your muscles senselessly." Carol was exhausted that night. She hadn't slept much the night before to do anything about it. She took a sedative, fell asleep. She woke up to the phone ringing, her alarm clock going off. She could barely get up. No sooner had she opened her stall than Kyle came rushing toward her on his bike. He looked very excited. "Carol, I did it," he said. "I gave Mom her first shot, and she's feeling better." "Congratulations," she said dryly. She was in so much pain she didn't want to see anyone. "Did something happen to you?" Carol's classmate tossed his bike. "It's nothing much," she said through tears. "It's just that I'm going to be filing for divorce." "Did you and Daniel have a fight?" As if he wanted to be supportive of his friend. "Carol, I can help you with that." "Kyle? With what?" She covered her face with her hands. "Will you make me forget that he has a mistress and that he cheated on me? Here you go, give this to your mom." She held out some buns in a bag. "Come over tonight after work," Kyle suggested. "You need a detached look at all this." Carol didn't say anything back to him, shrugging her shoulders. She just wanted to stop living at that moment. Daniel still didn't answer either. Carol called her parents, explaining everything to them. "Carol, get your things and come and visit us," her mother told her immediately. "How I didn't want your Daniel. He thought too highly of himself." And so he was. Not a man, but a wimp. Can't even admit his betrayal. And Daniel was actually very nervous. That was the real reason he hadn't filed for divorce yet. He didn't want to be seen as a scumbag in other people's eyes. But how to frame his wife? He hadn't figured it out until now. Now everyone would know he had a mistress. At work, they'd somehow managed to keep it quiet until the last moment. Daniel's mother had made up a legend that Lenora was a distant relative of theirs, and so Daniel often gave her a ride home. They never took liberties in public at the warehouse, and they rarely spoke at all. So from this side, Daniel looked like a decent family man and took care of his relatives. Tracy was often late for work. Then the three of them would drive home. Daniel swore the last words at Carol to himself. He really didn't want the gossip. Everything was going according to plan. His mother had promised to help him get rid of his wife. Carol seemed to feel her husband cursing her. She walked toward the house, but then abruptly turned around and headed to visit Kyle. Carol greeted her classmate's mother cheerfully. "It's so good to see you." The guest froze in place. She couldn't believe her eyes. No, Lenora wasn't walking yet, but she looked much better. "Can you imagine? The pains are gone," she reported contentedly. "I was so scared, and Kyle was too." "Carol, but what have I got to lose? 5 more years of being in a wheelchair, and then going to the other side of the world. I'm still afraid to believe in that miracle." Carol and Kyle walked to the workshop. The man sat down in a chair. He was overwhelmed with emotion, such joy that he couldn't even express it. "Carol, I consulted someone," Kyle began. "True, it's not a doctor, it's a biochemist. But anyway, he told me it's a very promising field. Something like growing bones, only not from stem cells, but from the cells of the bone itself. First, this substance fills the problematic joint. Then it expands the space a little bit and starts to fit into it. This somehow provokes the growth of new cells. I don't even know how to explain it scientifically." "Do you want to continue your experiment?" Carol inquired. "Carol, it seems very promising to me. I'd have to get my mother back on her feet," he sighed. "Serious research takes money, and I don't have any. I'm already denying myself everything to buy everything I need. I even needed high-grade gold for the rig." "But if you get a patent," Carol suggested, "then you could implement your invention." "Who's going to give it to me? That takes serious research, not knee-jerk like mine. If I could find sponsors. But in our city it is simply impossible. We either have beggars like me, or businessmen in the market. And these comrades are not interested in their future anyway. They don't even want a better life for their children. They live for one day, just to make more money." And yet Carol had the feeling that something would change. She returned home in high spirits. She felt like her life was making sense to her now. Carol was eager to study with Kyle, and the first thing she wanted to do was contact someone at her institute for advice. One faculty member she had once been good friends with, but that would come later. For now, the woman needed to pack her things and move in with her parents. Carol saw that her husband wasn't home. She rushed into one of the rooms and started packing her bags. The pain came over her again, and she dropped everything and lay down on the bed to calm down. Then a corner appeared, and Daniel suddenly slammed into a pole at full speed. The car was a pile of metal in an instant. Everything swirled before Daniel's eyes, and he lost consciousness. "No," screamed Tracy Alexandra as her son was overtaken by instant punishment. She walked around with crazy eyes and told everyone how her daughter-in-law had cast a spell on her and Daniel. She wanted to kill him, found a lover, and thought to get rid of my boy that way. How are such people incapable of admitting their guilt? And Tracy Alexandra has always been convinced of her uniqueness. Mistakes are for the weak. That's how she raised her son. He could look down on everyone forever, make fun of others. But there's always a price. Daniel came to. His mother was sitting beside him, crying. She had already argued with all the doctors, demanding that her son be brought back to life, though she had been warned that if Daniel did regain consciousness, he would most likely remain disabled. "I mean, how's that no walking?" Tracy Alexander jumped up from her chair in the doctor's office. "It's your responsibility to get him on his feet." "But I'm not the Lord God," replied the doctor. "Besides, you can arrange in New York for money to have him operated on. We don't do such complicated operations in our city. There are no such specialists. So it's up to you." Tracy Alexander shouted at the entire hospital, threatening the prosecutor's office. "Come on, bring the prosecutor. I'll show him in what conditions we work. Maybe they will at least raise our salaries," calmly replied the doctor. Tracy Alexandra was shaking, but she didn't realize that the doctors had already done everything they could. Daniel had survived, and already that could be called a miracle. After a few days, they allowed his mistress to visit the patient. She cried, and then decided to talk to the doctor. "Are you sure that nothing can be done? I beg you, maybe we can find some kind of cure." "Unfortunately, there is no such magic pill," the doctor sighed. "Prepare for the worst. He won't walk. He has serious problems with his spine." The mistress fell to the floor. She hadn't counted on this outcome at all. Lenora found herself in a very difficult position. For almost a week she thought about her future, and then she made a decision. Wade. Hi, she dialed her ex-boyfriend. "I'm so sorry," Lenora cried, fake tears. "I only love you. Let's get back together." Tracy Alexandra was also thinking hard. She was counting on Lenora in this situation. Daniel would get the house and the divorce. So they already had a place to live, she reasoned. I would visit them from time to time, help her out. The next day at Tracy's work, Alexandra wanted to have a serious talk with Daniel's mistress. "Lenora, can I talk to you for a minute?" She approached her. "My girl, I don't think you're going to have any more problems with housing. You and Daniel can stay at his place or yours. It's just that if you take him in, you can sell the house and pay for the treatment. The doctor said he might get his back working and my boy will at least be able to ride in a wheelchair." Lenora laughed. "Tracy Alexandra, you'll have to excuse me, but I can't." Somehow going pale, break Daniel. "Lenora, are you abandoning my son? I mean, he loves you so much." "Tracy Alexandra. You see, Wade came back to me," she smiled crookedly. "So we're living together now." "You took him back," Tracy Alexandra whispered. "Lenora, how could you do that? And my boy?" She sobbed. But Lenora wasn't about to change her plans. As long as Daniel had been healthy, everything had been fine. But now that he was an invalid, why would she want to ruin her life? Loving someone else is important, of course. But you can't love yourself any less. It's always me that comes first for people like Lenora. It was very hard for Tracy Alexandra to admit defeat. Things had spiraled so fast she'd forgotten all about her sister-in-law. But it was getting to her. The few times she'd gotten to Daniel's house, his wife hadn't been home. What am I going to tell her? Tracy Alexandra was working out a plan in her head. It's not like she's going to listen to me. I have to come up with something so she can't say no to me. The mother drove to her son's house almost every day. She was tired of running back and forth. "Mom, why isn't Lenora coming?" Daniel asked her one day. "Why don't you ask her to come over and see me? I miss her." "Daniel," she said as gently as possible. "Do you understand? And Lenora's gone. Her mom's sick. So she has to live in the village for now." Tracy Alexandra realized that she couldn't tell Daniel yet that Lenora had left him. It might make things worse for him. "Mom, call her," he asked. "Please. I want to hear her voice so badly." Tracy Alexandra was confused. She left the room and dialed Lenora. "I'm begging you." "Well, play along with him," she cried. "If he finds out now that you left him, God forbid." "Well, okay, I'll say a few words to him, and that's it," the ex-lover replied angrily. "If Wade finds out, he'll kill me." Lenora wasn't as affectionate as she'd been before. But Daniel was somewhat relieved. "Mom, did you see her?" His face turned contemptuous. "I don't even want to bring her up, but we need to settle on a house. I think I'll be divorced easily now. I'll probably recover for another 6 months, and then I'll go back to work." My mother didn't say anything. She knew that it would be impossible to realize all his dreams. "Okay, I'll talk to her," she sighed. "Daniel, let's talk about this later, after you've been discharged." Tracy Alexandra urgently needed to get Carol back. Hanging her disabled son around her neck was not for her. In words alone, Tracy Alexandra could be the perfect mother, but spending the rest of her old age caring for a sick person was too much. Carol was screaming all over the house. She couldn't take it anymore. She'd never met such mean people before. She was putting her things in a bag. In fact, Carol was in such an agitated state that she could not control herself. Finally, her hysteria ended and tears were shed. After that, the woman felt lighter. "I hate it," she whispered. Carol carried some bags outside and hailed a cab. Her mother had already called several times. She was frantically worried about her daughter. No sooner had Carol laid out her things than she was called. "Yes," she said angrily. She had no time to talk. The phone interrogated her first and last name. "Your husband was in an accident?" she was suddenly informed. "He's in intensive care. The chances are slim." Carol was numb. She couldn't even believe what she was hearing at first. "Mom, he was in an accident," she said quietly, and rushed over to her. Of course, Carol was very angry with Daniel, but she didn't wish him dead. "Are you going to go to him?" Mom asked. Her daughter immediately shook her head negatively. "Mom, what's the point of all this? He doesn't love me. He has a mistress. Let her worry about him." Carol wiped away her tears. Be that as it may, Carol still wanted to visit her husband, but she held herself in check. Why? She was talking to someone in her head. If he doesn't want me, she still had feelings for Daniel, and Carol couldn't hide it. But in the situation they were all in, her coming would have looked just plain stupid even in her own eyes. She had to deal with her feelings on her own. Still, she talked to Daniel's doctor. She drove to the hospital early one morning before work. "He'll remain disabled," the doctor said. "How's the verdict?" "Unfortunately, there is serious damage to his spine." Since Carol now lived far from where she worked, she, like many in her town, rode her bicycle. "Hi." Kyle rode up to her. "Carol, come see us if you can. Really need your advice, Carol. Daniel's been in an accident." She couldn't stand it and cried. "He's going to be an invalid now." "You're going back to him now?" Consternation showed on Kyle's face. Carol noticed how his voice trembled. "No," she shook her head negatively. "He has another woman, and he doesn't care about me at all." The man picked up the bread and pastries and went about his business. Carol watched him go. Yes, the old jacket Kyle seemed to have worn as a teenager, the shoes with holes in them. As a classmate had told her, he didn't spend the money from his mother's pension, and that's what they lived on. And whatever he managed to earn or sell, he put into his rig. "Why is that?" Carol sighed. "Those who live only for themselves prosper, and those who do their best for others are dragging out a miserable existence in poverty like this." Despite the pain, Carol decided to go out and accept her friend's invitation. It had been almost 2 weeks since Kyle had first administered the medicine to her mother. They hadn't seen each other much since then. Kyle said he had been very busy with work the whole time. Carol walked into her friend's house. He was smiling. It was obvious that he knew about something, and the guests obviously had no idea about it. The woman entered the room and froze in place. Standing by the window was Kyle's mother on crutches. "God, how is this possible?" she whispered. "Come out." Kyle walked toward her. Amber Adams demonstrated a few tentative steps. Carol looked at Kyle in bewilderment. Is this a joke? She was overwhelmed with emotion. "Kyle, you can't believe it." "It's true." He walked over to his mother and hugged her. Well, I'll tell you honestly, if Mom recovers, we'll certainly lose something, he laughed. But I'm willing to work and compensate Mom for her pension. I'll go to work myself. If I move normally right away, the woman replied. For so many years, I don't want to sit any longer. The young people chatted till nearly 3 o'clock. This event was a big deal to both of them. Then Kyle walked Carol home. Or rather, they rode their bikes home together. And then he came home. Carol went to bed. She thought about the patience and stamina it took not to break down like that. And Kyle, he said, had been failing for years. He'd quit for a couple months, and then, it would be like an impulse from inside him to get up. He'd get back on track, her friend told her. Carol herself felt that now that she was free, she could do something useful. She would really like to support Kyle first. If I could find someone interested. She sighed. Then Kyle would have a chance at life. If he paid good money for the patent, it could be enough for him for years to come. Maybe someone else would invest in the invention. He had so many ideas. But again, it all came down to finances. The teacher Carol contacted told her right away that government organizations were unlikely to be interested in such a thing. They wanted everything for free. So you have to look for someone from serious businessmen. And where will you find them, these businessmen? She whispered frustratedly. It's one thing to be in New York, but it's another to be in a province like this. The next day prepared new adventures for Carol. Around 10, Tracy's mother-in-law Alexandra approached her stall. Panting with anger, Carol tried to be as friendly as possible. We could talk to you, she smiled for emphasis. Carol thought it would be about the divorce or the division of the apartment, since those were still open to her. So she agreed. There were no visitors, and the woman stepped outside. She crossed her arms over her chest and waited. Carol, her mother-in-law, sighed. You misunderstood us last time. You see, she seduced my son. It was obvious she was struggling with every word. Anyway, she's been blackmailing him, threatening Daniel. She's got some man. I'm pretty sure he's the one who beat up my son 3 days before that accident. Lenora stated that if Daniel didn't bring her gold jewelry as a gift, Tracy Alexandra held her handkerchief to her mouth. My son would be stabbed to death. We wanted to make it look like you had my jewelry that she wanted. Like you'd taken it. Carol clearly sensed that her mother-in-law was trying to put her in a state of pity for her and Daniel. She even began to sympathize with her husband. Emotions overwhelmed her and she stopped thinking rationally. Okay, stop, she said to either herself or Tracy Alexandra. Now, don't make a fool of me. I wonder how it's possible to blackmail a man into sleeping with someone. That can only happen by free will. Did she tie him up, rape him? Tracy Alexandra was silent. She tried to catch a single sensible thought in her head, but she was having none of it. Carol, but I'm begging you. You don't leave him. Daniel loves you very much. He keeps asking, when are you going to visit him? I'm begging you. Her mother-in-law was still looking at her. But as far as I'm concerned, your son doesn't want a mistress. And you do now, Carol laughed. I'm always amazed at people like that. How can you be such a creature? I mean, you're nothing. How loudly you shout at my Daniel, what's the problem? So you look after him yourself. Carol, well, you must realize that I'm not young anymore, she said in an angelic voice. I don't have the strength to visit him. One thought occurred to Carol, and that would be the last thing she would do for him. Tracy Alexandra cheered up. She didn't understand what Carol was talking about then, and Carol wouldn't talk to her again. To her delight, people approached. Tracy Alexandra almost sent her an air kiss out of joy. After work, Carol drove to Kyle's house. He was tinkering in the workshop as usual. Sitting on the bench was Amber Adams. She was happy, smiling, and greeted Carol. Oh look, I walked with crutches. Much better today, she said. Carol hugged her with delight. Kyle watched them from the sidelines. He was very pleased that his mother liked Carol. Shall we go? He waved to his guest. "There's something else I want to show you." "Kyle, could you help me?" Carol asked seriously. "Do you think your stuff could help Daniel?" "Well," he scratched his head, "I can't say for sure. But if you think about it theoretically, yes. I mean, Mom's bones are regenerating, and so are tendons and nerve connections." "Could you help him?" Carol looked hopefully into his eyes. "If he agrees." "All right," Kyle answered without much enthusiasm. "I'll do it for you." Carol didn't pay much attention to his last words. It wasn't that she wanted to go on living with Daniel, but she clearly felt that she had to give him the chance. "Thank you." Carol suddenly ran up to the man and kissed him on the cheek. Kyle blushed. He went out of his workshop under the pretense of taking something, rushed into his room and collapsed on his bed. He was very afraid that someone might find out about his secret. "Well, are you ready?" After a minute he entered the workshop again. "Carol, come on, look at this." He opened an old notebook with yellowed pages. "This is a plate that is supposed to generate special radiations. Its power is small, but unlike those that now exist, such "I don't know anything about that," he smiled. "I'd really appreciate it if you'd look into it." It was one of the best evenings they had ever had as friends. Kyle saw Carol off. "Late. Carol, thank you." A friend said goodbye to her. "I wouldn't have succeeded if it weren't for your support. I really appreciate it." He lowered his head. "Kyle, you're a very good friend too, and I feel like you underestimate yourself," Carol replied. Carol touched his hair. Kyle got on his iron horse and rode toward home. His heart was singing. It was May outside. The next day Carol wanted to go to her husband's house from work. Of course there was great anger in her heart, but she realized that she would never take revenge. Especially not if Kyle's drug could help him. There were no harmful substances in it. Any doctor would have said it wouldn't work. But as Kyle himself had said, it wasn't so much the composition that was the main thing here, but the process of getting it. Carol tossed the guests into her bag, got on her bike. She didn't know how she was going to talk to Daniel, or even if the dialogue would take place. Carol waited a moment to catch her breath. She went over in her head what she was going to say to her husband. She looked into the room, and there was nothing there. That was the most important thing. Carol really didn't want to meet her mother-in-law. And Daniel was awake. You could tell by the look on his face that he was thinking about something. Lenora had told him that she wouldn't be coming to see him in the next few months. Daniel got some kind of strange premonition. "What are you doing here?" he asked his wife in horror. His cheekbones shifted nervously. "Go away. I don't want to see you." "Daniel, let's talk to you," Carol said calmly. "We're adults." "This is all your fault. Is it your fault that I'm lying here right now?" Daniel accused his wife. "Daniel, come on. You know that's a lie." She tried to calm him down. "I can help you." He laughed to devalue Carol. "You've accomplished nothing in your life except your stall. Kyle invented a special drug that helps your bones get back to normal. It's perfectly safe," the wife began. "I don't want to hear about that quack. Although I'm not surprised you cheated on me with him. You're both assholes," Daniel shouted, drool flying from his mouth. "Get out, Tahir. I wish Kyle would die sooner, that penniless hobo on his prehistoric bicycle." "Daniel," he lifted his mother. "She's been in a wheelchair for years. This is your chance." Carol tried to ignore his profanity. "Go away," Daniel shouted, and his red face said he was in a very emotional state. A nurse came running in and asked her guest to leave. Carol saw Daniel turning his head from one side to the other and shouting something. "What did his pumped-up body give him?" sighed the wife. "His psyche is so weak that his muscles could never compensate for that loss." Carol was genuinely sorry that Daniel had refused her help. She realized that it was unlikely that his mother would mess around with him. She'd already hinted at it when they'd met. "It's his choice," Carol whispered. "I did the best I could. His accident wasn't my fault. I never cheated on him." 2 days later, Carol's mother-in-law came to work again. She was no longer asking her to go back to her son. "Carol, I think you need to take Daniel's situation seriously," she said. "I'm asking you to give him the house. I can't cure him on my own." "Okay," Carol agreed. "But on one condition: you'll never be in my life again." Tracy Alexandra agreed. After the tantrum her son had thrown at her about Carol, she had no more requests or complaints for her. When Daniel's mother started this game, she felt like a real queen. But every game comes to an end sooner or later. And the one who seemed at the beginning to have every chance to win, by the end of the game lost. Everyone had made their choice. Even the accident didn't break Daniel's pride. Who knows, maybe thanks to Kyle he could have stood up. But that would have been beyond the realm of dreams. Because men like Daniel would never reach out to men like Kyle. It's beneath their dignity. It was painful to recognize that Daniel's life had no value, as he lived only for himself. And such crazy romantics, dreamers who look like fools from the outside, are capable of moving mountains. And so ended the story of Carol and her husband. After that, the woman was never again interested in Daniel's life. He was rumored to be living with his mother. A few days later, Carol met with Kyle. The man gave her a very strange look. "So are you going to help him?" Breathlessly he asked. For Kyle, you could say it was a matter of life and death. "No," he rejected our help. She smiled faintly. "Kyle, I don't want to talk about this anymore." "I'm all for it," he cheered. "Carol, Mom made her first cake today. She really wants you to come over for a visit." "Okay," she promised Kyle. "Tell her I'll be there." Kyle's invitation lifted her spirits. Carol worked through her day so effortlessly, as if she were being held above ground by some force. "You're glowing today," customers told her. "You're in a good mood." Carol nodded at them. She really did feel happy, as if a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The evening had been so wonderful that Carol didn't even want to go home. It seemed to her that this was where she belonged. They sat in the workshop after tea. Kyle stared at his guest. His lips moved as if he were saying something. "Carol," he said quietly. "I'm like, how do I say this?" The woman stepped closer to him and stroked his face with her hand. "I love you," Kyle finally said. "I love you too," she kissed him. "I want to be your muse," the woman whispered. "We'll do everything together. I'll help you with everything." "Thank you," he touched her hair. "Carol, I'm as lucky as Rex. I'll have not only a wife, but a friend and a companion." "I believe in you," Carol said. "You will succeed. Kyle, you're a genius. You have to admit it." "I'll try," he said timidly. "I'm not afraid of anything with you." The man breathed in the scent of her hair and couldn't believe he could be so happy. 7 years had passed. "Kyle, we're here," came from the backyard. "Are you home?" Carol headed toward her husband's huge workshop. On the way, she stopped and looked at the beautiful garden. She and Kyle had managed to find a sponsor back then after all, and Kyle had made some very good money. They had bought a 2-story house with a large lot. Amber Adams was on the first floor. She ran the garden. Carol took care of the children, but most of the time they all spent together in the lab at Dad's house. Carol gave birth to a son almost a year after she registered. And when he turned 3, they had a yearling daughter and another boy. In general, as Carol predicted, Kyle became not only a scientist but also a caring father. And despite his crazy busy schedule, he made time for his children. Now, many years later, the man was again working on the development of non-contact administration of drugs by means of special radiation. There was a businessman who invested good money in his invention. And since Kyle couldn't live without his inventions, of course he agreed. Dad. His oldest son ran into his workshop. We're back. Oh, I hadn't heard his father jumped up. How was your vacation? Did you enjoy it? Yes. Grandma didn't even want to get out of the pool, Oscar laughed. Why did he go to the bank and get a loan for me? She was numbed by her mother-in-law's words. Eric is probably not that bad, he grumbled to himself. Jean froze on the doorstep of her son's apartment. Eric had been traveling for a week and had asked his mother to stop by, pick up some important documents, scan them, and send them to him. If his wife Madison had been home, he wouldn't have disturbed Jean. But Madison had gone to visit Betty's mother, whom she hadn't seen in years. Even for her daughter's wedding, Betty couldn't attend because of the predictions. Later, Betty's condition improved, but she still had a lot of time on her hands. Then her son got sick, then one thing, another. And time went by. Betty wasn't young, but she still wanted to see her daughter, who'd been living in another city for a long time. So Madison went to visit her while her husband was away on business and her son was at camp. The young woman had plenty of time to be with her relative. Forgot, damn it, he grinned. Completely slipped my mind. Slipped out, he grinned. I've been working too hard. It's a nightmare. I was going to call Madison. It slipped out that she wasn't home either. Pick it up, scan it, and mail it to me. If it's not too much trouble. I'm sorry I had to bother you like this. I didn't expect this myself. It wasn't hard for Jean to help her son. Eric has always been, is, and will always be the most important thing in a woman's life. The meaning of her existence, not otherwise, because Jean had no one else but her son. She separated from her husband when Eric was very young, and has not seen him since. The husband, of course, did not pay alimony, and was not interested in his son's life, which, however, was more of a plus than a minus. Jean really did not want her husband to participate in the upbringing of her boy. She was afraid that Eric would follow in his father's footsteps and grow up to be the same irresponsible and lazy freak. But fortunately, this did not happen. Eric was very sensitive and attentive, grew up a normal, kind guy, did not grab stars from the sky, but did not sit idly by. True, he couldn't get into the university, he didn't have enough points. And Jin had no money for her son's education, and there was nowhere to get it from. Eric was not too upset about it. He reassured his mother it's nothing. He grinned when Jean, almost crying, apologized to her son. The woman was ashamed that all her life she had lived almost in poverty, working 3 jobs and not seeing the light of day, and still could not give her son all the best. She didn't even have money for paid education, not to mention real estate and other things available only to the children of the rich. For someone like Eric, they were a pipe dream. But unlike his mother, he was never discouraged. Poverty didn't bother him at all. Small is not small, he used to say. And about education, Eric considered it pointless. Mom, but who sits in these universities now? He pondered, convincing Jean. Who needs it? You're right, only rich kids have time to sit around for 5 years. I, for example, do not have such time. And I'm not interested in it. After school, Eric went straight to work. He was not taken into the army for health reasons, and it was as if a stone had fallen from Jean's shoulders. Thank God, son. I was so worried, she wailed. What else could she do? Her only son, her own blood. And there would never be another. And no one could bring him back if anything happened. Until then, Eric's fate was quite favorable, which could not but please his mother. Eric grew from a bartender to a restaurant manager and began to receive a fairly decent salary. As soon as his career became certain, Eric thought about starting a family, which caused a storm of emotions and worries in Jean. The future daughter-in-law did not impress the woman properly. Why do you need a country girl, son? her mother wailed when Eric walked his Madison home after the formal family dinner. "She's even younger than you, and she doesn't even know where she came from. I don't know what kind of person she is. In short, she's kind of suspicious. At least that's what I thought." "Mom, I didn't grow up in a palace." Either Eric laughed, surprised that his mother was so concerned about Madison's background. "And we got the apartment from my grandmother. Just lucky. We were born here. And she's a long way from the metropolis. But that doesn't mean she's any worse than you or me. We have something in common: poverty. Madison is very hardworking and strives for a better life. I'm sure she and I will have a strong family." Eric met his future wife in the same restaurant where he worked. Madison immediately appealed to him. Such a purposeful and active girl could not remain without the attention of the young manager. Therefore, their relationship developed rapidly, as far as possible. This could not help but embarrass Jean, who was shocked when her son told her that he had known Madison for only a few months. "So, you're going to marry her already?" she exclaimed. "You've known a girl for a week and you're ready to drag her to the registry office? You should at least find out who her parents are, what they're like. What if they're alcoholics or worse? I'll have good grandchildren, I can't tell you that. I've dreamed of grandchildren like that my whole life." Madison didn't like to talk about her family. Every time Eric tried to start a conversation about it, she changed the subject. He understood that there was no telling what she might be going through. After all, he wasn't going to marry her relatives. He was going to marry her. Blinded by love, Eric thought Madison was the perfect girl of his dreams: beautiful, smart, determined. He didn't need another bride. He paid no attention to his mother's words. A few weeks after he proposed to Madison, the chief told Eric about his new career prospects. "I'm going to be expanding my network." John Smith shared his plans. "I think you could help me with that. You've been working for me for so many years, serving me faithfully, so to speak. You can be trusted by me and my institution. So I have an offer I'm sure you won't refuse. Let's talk about it. If you don't mind, of course. I wouldn't want to postpone such important matters." "How could you think that?" Eric grinned. "You know I'm always in favor, especially when it comes to work." "That's good," smiled John Smith. "Then come to my office in an hour and we'll talk and discuss further plans." Eric was happy when the chief informed him that he wanted to make him his confidant. At last he would have the job he had always dreamed of: traveling, negotiating, looking for places to open new locations in other cities. An amazingly interesting and busy life, and most importantly, a very decent salary. Of course, John Smith promised Eric a substantial fee. It's not just sitting in one restaurant. Compensation for the trouble must be motivating. Well, the chief winked. "So we've agreed on everything?" Of course, Eric nodded. "You have no idea how timely this is." Eric was just about to get married. He needed the money now. He needs to get an apartment. Madison and I weren't going to cramp my mom. That's the right thing to do, Eric reasoned. But I'd be careful with that girl if I were you. "Well, so would you," sighed Eric, who didn't understand how Madison could be disliked. She was so wonderful, so amazing. And his mother's attitude toward her potential daughter-in-law was something Eric could understand. Jean was just jealous of her only son. She was afraid that once he married her, he'd drift away from her. At first he would visit occasionally, then communication would be limited to phone calls, and eventually they would become a luxury. The woman was just worried that she would be all alone. After all, she had no one but Eric. But what could be confusing in a girl with whom he did not even know? No one. Eric sincerely did not understand, so he did not develop this topic too much. He felt it necessary to ask carefully why Madison suddenly aroused such antipathy in him. "Well, I've been around for a while and I've seen a lot of different people," he said meaningfully. "I've learned to understand them. And I'll tell you something, Madison. Your girlfriend is very complicated. She never does anything for nothing, I'm guessing you're going to say. What's in it for her with me? If she wanted a favorable arrangement, she would have found herself some millionaire who sprinkled her with gold and the best resorts in the world took her. But if she's with you, then there is a benefit. And then it's a benefit. And then it's up to you to figure it out. As they say, you can't use your own head. Eric didn't take the words seriously at the time. Madison was too precious to him to look for flaws in her. And the girl didn't look like a cunning predator who came to megacities in packs every day in search of a better life. But it seemed so only at first glance. People with experience saw right through Madison, but not Eric. He was too naive and well-mannered. He'd spent his whole life riding up his mom's coattails. He grew up poor, but he was cared for and loved. He just couldn't see the bad in people. Madison didn't even know what Madison was after. Although the girl was indeed not amiss, but showed herself in all her glory much later, which left a deep wound on Eric's heart, which, as it seemed to him, will never heal. And everything had started out so well: wedding rings, traveling, buying an apartment, and plans for the near future. The moment Eric married Madison, he thought he was the happiest man in the world. Even Jean, who was quite skeptical of her son's family life, couldn't spoil his mood. Eric was elated and hoped that in the very near future his wife would give him a baby boy. It was time for him to become a father, and he didn't want to postpone this important event. Only Madison didn't show much initiative. To be more precise, she wasn't going to have a baby at all, and did everything she could to avoid getting pregnant. But she didn't tell Eric about it, of course. With all her might, the girl pretended that, just like him, worried about the lack of heirs. Allegedly ran to doctors, each of whom said the same thing, which Madison then with a sigh recounted to Eric. And he believed her and waited patiently for the moment when all the problems would be resolved. Eric didn't even realize that would never happen, because there were no problems. Madison couldn't stand children. She was allergic to infant crying and screaming. She herself had grown up in a large family, and instead of reading books, going out with friends, and doing useful things for herself, Madison had to babysit the younger ones her mother gave birth to. When Betty learned that her daughter had made a good deal, she was happy for her, but reminded her of the younger children, "Don't forget to send us some money. Just a little bit, but at least something. Rachel's shoes are worn out, and Anthony needs to get ready for school. You know I don't make that much," Madison thought to herself indignantly. "Did I really give birth so I could work for all of you?" She married out of a peculiar calculation. Initially, Madison realized that Eric could not provide her with a rich and luxurious life. But he had something important. He genuinely loved Madison and would do anything for her. Besides, Eric was a local resident and had his own apartment. He was a very favorable candidate for Madison, and it would be foolish to pass him up. If she married some fat rich man, she would be enslaved, and her whole life would be reduced to satisfying the whims of an old rich man. That was not Madison's plan at all. After the wedding, she was able to quit her demanding job and stay home. Eric hoped that Madison was about to give him a baby boy, and then a second and third child. He wanted a large and strong family, so he decided that Madison would take care of the house, the nest, and household issues. When buying an apartment, Eric did not skimp, took a large and spacious. This really upset Jean, who hated her daughter-in-law, but hoped that the young people would live with her. The apartment needed renovation, and she expected the newlyweds to do it. However, Eric wanted to live separately with his wife and hoped that his mother would understand him. "Mom, we cannot live with you under the same roof. You don't like Madison and are against our relationship. Sooner or later there will be conflict, and I don't want that. Besides, we want lots of kids. And you're not old enough. You need a vacation, not a baby crying at night." And so it was, only Jean was very afraid for her son and did not trust Madison. And as it turned out, with good reason. About a year after the wedding, the daughter-in-law never gave her son the long-awaited heir. Mother-in-law increasingly often asked uncomfortable questions: how and why. All this very annoyed Madison, who steadily drank birth control pills and prayed not to get pregnant. But contraception failed her. Madison went to great lengths to feign joy when Eric guessed she was pregnant because of her recent poor health. Until recently, Madison hadn't believed she was knocked up, writing it off as overwork. But when she discovered the delay, she was horrified to realize that she couldn't escape her fate. Termination of pregnancy was out of the question. Eric would have realized everything and divorced her. She had no choice. She had to register and pretend to be happy. "How long have I waited for this?" exclaimed Eric over the moon. Finally, the dream has come true. The long-awaited baby is about to be born. From this moment on, Madison and I will begin a new beginning in our relationship. Throughout her pregnancy, Madison had been feeling very ill, which made her disgusted mood even worse. "Damn this pregnancy," she resented, complaining to her mother about feeling sick. "May it all burn blue. I hate it. That's what these modern methods led to. Now my whole life is down the drain. I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no experience. This baby will be born soon, and I'll have to take care of it around the clock." Betty was horrified by her daughter's words. She hoped that these emotions were temporary and would pass soon. "Are you out of your mind, Madison?" she wailed. "Children, this is happiness. And there's no escape. You married a townie with an apartment, and now you're working your ass off. What else can I tell you?" Betty didn't attend her daughter's wedding. Madison asked her not to come. "But you realize that bringing all these people here, Rachel and Tyler, is going to raise questions," Madison reasoned. "It's not good for me, you know. Eric's mom can't stand me. And if she finds out I have a large family, it'll be the end of me. But it doesn't matter to you. You can look at the pictures later. And it's not going to be anything special. It's just a celebration, with all the trimmings." Betty didn't have anyone to leave the kids with. So there was some truth to what her daughter said. And she didn't want to ruin Madison's personal life. Her future depended on it. Rachel and Tyler are no strangers to family. Madison did send money. And after she started dating Eric, the amount even increased a little. At that time, still future husband always gave her beloved pocket money, and she sent them to the family. Betty could not be happy. Finally bought normal shoes for her brother and sister, clothes. "Thank you, my daughter," she wailed, almost crying. "Thank you for not forgetting your family. I don't know how to thank you." Madison wasn't doing all this for her mother, her brother and sister, but for herself. If it were up to her, she wouldn't give a dime to her family. But the girl was not ready to listen to the regular reproaches of her mother. So she gave Betty a little money for poverty, just so that she would not bother. And so it went on until the birth. With the birth of the child, Madison planned to change the established order and perhaps remove the mother from the maintenance, if because of her lies would not fall into a trap. After that, there was no way Madison was going to be without her mother's help. Although who would have thought that things would turn out this way? They say old love never rusts. Only in Madison's case, it wasn't love, it was entertainment. But still, it was better than nothing at all. After the arrival of his son, Eric worked even harder. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? The happy father tried hard for the sake of his son's bright future, so that the boy by adulthood had an apartment, a car, and a good education. And Eric did not plan to stop there. As soon as Braden was born, he immediately started talking about a second child. But Madison had given herself her word that this was the first and last birth of her life, never again. She vowed to herself as she looked in the hospital restroom mirror. Eric was bouncing with happiness and delight, and Madison struggled to bring herself to hold her son to her chest. Her whole body ached, especially since the role of a mother of many children the girl has never enticed. Life at the ready, this is yes, but to reproduce like a rabbit, definitely not. It's not my thing. So Madison was convinced that Eric should have tempered his ardor. But since he was not ready for it, the circumstances were very much to the girl's advantage. Madison was only involved in her son's upbringing partly. To throw off her shoulders part of the responsibilities, She was even willing to tolerate her mother-in-law, who was genuinely happy about the birth of a grandson and regularly came to help her daughter-in-law with the child. Eric even offered his mother to temporarily move in with them. "Well, why should you travel?" he reasoned. "Constantly have to travel. And so you get up and do as much as you like. Why not? Especially since your relationship with Madison seems to be on the mend. You're not even criticizing her as much lately as you used to." Jean just didn't want to upset her son. He would surely make excuses for his out-of-touch wife, such as saying that she was still young and inexperienced, so she didn't know how to take care of a child. Eric would never admit that Madison was a bad mother who didn't care about her son. A veil of happiness was covering his eyes, and the man just didn't see it. Jean, on the other hand, saw it all. She had a keen eye for such things. You can't fool an experienced woman. Madison had it all written all over her face. Just a glance and everything became clear at once. Only a lovesick and happy fool like Eric could ignore such obvious things. But that came with time. Jean was sure that sooner or later her son and daughter-in-law's relationship would crack. They were two different worlds. If Eric was a model family man, an honest, decent man, Madison was clearly a man of her own mind, and her soul was black. And someday Eric would see that, just so it wasn't too late. Jean didn't want to think about it. Such thoughts depressed her. Since Braden's birth, all her attention had been focused on her grandson. What happened to Madison was no longer of any importance to her. She wasn't helping her daughter-in-law, but her son, who was struggling to provide a decent living for his family. But despite the fact that Jean stopped reacting to Madison like a bull to a red rag, she absolutely refused to move in with him. She did not change her attitude toward her daughter-in-law and did not want to live with her under the same roof. Eric understood his mother's decision and did not insist. He was very grateful for her help. It can be considered that Braden grew up in the arms of Jean, who did everything that depended on her to ensure that her grandson had a prosperous childhood. When the child grew up, the woman often took him to visit her. Madison was all for it. The less time she had to spend on the child, the better. She had the opportunity to spend those hours on herself. And what could be better than a break from all that work? And her soul was begging for a break. And Madison saw her son as just that, a burden. She was very tired of him, and could hardly hide her emotions from her husband, who, as it seemed to her, had completely withdrawn because of constant employment at work. And if he worked for his wife's wants and needs, Madison would not even say a word to him. But Eric wouldn't let her spend any extra money, saving it all for the future. Even to send some money to Betty, Madison had to save the money she'd been given by her husband and find a way. She hardly ever went into the details of her family's life. Meanwhile, her brother and sister were growing up and demanding more and more from their mother every day. They needed money for this, that, and the 10th. Once Betty hinted to her daughter that it would be a good idea to help with Rachel and Tyler's future, to which she said nothing and walked away from the conversation. "Let's not look that far ahead," Madison replied meaningfully to her mother. "When you asked if I could drag my brother and sister to the big city afterward, they're too young to talk about it. When they grow up, when they decide what their future plans are, then we'll talk about it." Madison thought to herself that no one had ever gotten her anywhere or helped her in any way, and for some reason she had to do it again. Or not again, but again. And then Greg showed up if he wasn't laden. He fell on Madison's head like a snowball and brought confusion into her relatively peaceful and trouble-free life. When the former lover, whom Madison dated in her distant youth, wrote to her on social media, she didn't even believe it at first. How did he find her? He'd been looking for her with a purpose. Recently, Greg more and more often remembered his first love. His personal life did not work out, his career did not work out either. And so Gregory was more and more often immersed in the memories of the distant past. Word of mouth got around and they agreed to meet. Madison decided why not, she hadn't even realized that Greg had moved to the big city too. And it was the one she lived in. After all, they hadn't spoken in years. And this meeting was something she'd wanted at first purely out of curiosity. Madison wondered how the former beau was doing. But after a while she realized that Greg could be a good entertainment for her. Her husband was constantly missing on his business trips, all the money he made. The son was almost constantly in the care of Jean, who loved her grandson very much. And since her mother-in-law considered Madison a bad mother, she tried as little as possible to give her the opportunity to spend time with her son. And the daughter-in-law was only too glad. There was more than enough time to cheat on her spouse, so she didn't hesitate. Just a few weeks after meeting Greg, she got involved with him. They met in a small rented apartment, in which the young man lived alone for several years. Madison hadn't even considered hiding, just took and left to her lover, dumping her son to her mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law hadn't asked her daughter-in-law any questions in a long time. Yes, and suspicions of Madison's behavior would not have caused Jean, if at some point daughter-in-law did not cross the line. "When are you going to invite me to your house?" Greg, to whom Madison had foolishly promised to invite him to visit, asked. She said that when Eric was on a business trip, she would invite Greg. Madison said, "I'd like to spend time in a normal apartment, not this dump." Greg didn't have money for rent or a hotel. He made an average salary. He lived better than he did in his hometown, but not luxurious. Greg wasn't about to splurge to spend time with a girl he'd once dated behind the garages. It would be too much for him. No amount of love for Madison would make him change his mind. I'll definitely invite you," Madison waved him off. "Only you'll be my former classmate, nothing more." "Got it." "What, Eric might suddenly come back?" Greg grinned. "Then maybe we shouldn't take any chances." "No, it's not that." Madison sighed, knowing her mother-in-law had the keys. The girl's act was as stupid as possible. Anyone else in her position would never have gotten involved in such a venture. But that day, when she and Greg had spontaneously secluded themselves in the marital bedroom, there was no sign of trouble. Eric was on a business trip. The son was at camp. Who would have thought her husband would forget the paperwork he so suddenly needed at home? Madison didn't even hear the door open. Her mother-in-law, on the other hand, knew what was going on right away. It was hard not to guess from the sounds coming from the room. Jean was furious. She was ready to burst into the room and kick her daughter-in-law out of the house. But she found the strength to calm down and look at the situation sensibly. It didn't take much intelligence to cause a scandal and destroy her son's family. Except that Eric would never forgive it. Jean knew that. So she decided to make the best of the situation for herself and her son. Instead of barging into the room where her daughter-in-law was having fun with her lover, Jean lurked in the kitchen. Madison and Greg would have come here sooner or later anyway. And that's when Jean would have a frank talk with her sister-in-law. It happened faster than the woman would have guessed. No sooner had her mother-in-law made tea than she heard footsteps in the hallway, and a moment later, curses pouring from her sister-in-law's mouth. "Oh, shit," Madison exclaimed when she saw her mother-in-law's boots in the hallway. Damn, disbelievingly forgot I hadn't locked the secret door. That's why Jean was able to open the door with her key. How could I?" Continued Madison's indignation, who was so confused she didn't know what to do next. Her thoughts were confused and she was overwhelmed with shame. The girl walked to the kitchen where her mother-in-law was sitting and drinking tea. Madison could not immediately find the right words to start a conversation. She realized that in the best case she would face a scandal and divorce. And at worst it was scary to imagine what someone like Jean could do for the sake of her son. She will stop at nothing to avenge his suffering. That's why her mother-in-law's proposal sounded unexpected. For a few minutes she speculated about Eric's feelings and what such a situation might lead to. When Greg appeared in the doorway, the mother-in-law demanded that he leave. "You weren't called here," she exclaimed. "No shame, no conscience. Not only are you sleeping with another man's wife, you're interfering in the conversation. Greg, you really should leave now, Madison muttered, confused. Wait for me in my room, I'll talk to you in a minute. And then we'll pack up and leave together. The grief-stricken lover had nothing to do but obey. He was no less confused than Madison, because he had not expected it to turn out this way. Greg imagined what problems awaited his friend in life, and he didn't want to be a part of them. Madison was ready for everything, except for the fact that her mother-in-law would be so cynical about the situation and demand money for her silence. So, that's it? The mother-in-law said, looking Madison intently in the eye. Jean's tone did not bode well. So the girl froze, waiting to hear what she was so afraid of. And after all, divorce was not part of her plans at all. Next to Eric, Madison lived quite freely. He was constantly working, and despite the fact that he saved most of the money, still provided her with quite a comfortable life. For her mother-in-law took care of her son most of the time. It was a dream life, and Madison was in danger of losing it all. But she did. In return for her silence, her mother-in-law demanded a large sum of money, which Madison had no place to get. If you want to have fun, Jean said. As they say, bad things are easy, and you are not capable of anything else in this life. But my son mustn't suffer. If he did something stupid by getting involved with you, then my Eric doesn't have to be responsible for all your shenanigans. And I'm prepared to keep your affair from him. It will avoid a scandal and save your marriage. But in return, you'll owe me something. And don't take too long. I need the money as soon as possible. If I don't get it, I'll tell my son. Then you can kiss this apartment and your carefree life goodbye. And considering that you haven't worked or done anything for years, it's not hard to guess that you'll be left with nothing. You'll go back to the country, where you belong. Madison guessed why her mother-in-law needed such a large sum of money, but she didn't dare to say it. Where would I get that kind of money? She mumbled confusedly. You know I don't have a penny. Eric handles all the finances in our family. Maybe you should ask him. Her mother-in-law laughed. Jean didn't know how to react to her daughter-in-law's absurd suggestion. If she could ask her son for money, she would definitely do it. And she had already tried many times. Mom, well, understand you, but I cannot invest such a large amount of money to repair your apartment. Justified the son. You know Madison and I have a baby. I'm saving every penny I can to buy another place to live. I have to think about my son's future, and by the way, your grandsons, you love Brayden too, don't you? We should have sold the old place a long time ago. It's more profitable than fixing it up. You're not a stupid woman. You know that. And frankly, I'm amazed at your persistence. Jean would be happy to sell the apartment, but could not, because her late mother strictly forbade her to do so. When Alexander was alive, Georgia gave her daughter her word that she would never leave her inheritance in the hands of strangers. You see, this apartment is the whole meaning of my life with my father, said the woman. It was inherited from my late mother and must pass from generation to generation, while remaining in our family. It has a special energy, and the apartment itself is special. You just don't realize it yet, but in time you will. Jin really didn't understand. Her late mother's words were still a mystery to her to this day. What were these features of the inherited apartment that her mother was talking about? What was so special about it? And why Alexandra Georgia so did not want the dwelling to ever end up in the wrong hands. For the modern world, her desire was wild. Selling old apartments and buying new ones had long since become commonplace, and it was at least strange to cling to a property whose walls were about to fall off. But Jean had to do it. Since Jean could no longer live with the encroaching mold in the kitchen, bathroom, and wallpaper yellowed from dilapidation, she had to get the money for repairs somewhere. Jean even tried to take out a loan, but was turned down. Apparently the income is very small, she sighed to herself when she got home from the bank. And the age is not the same. The amount is large. Apparently they're afraid that I'll die and won't pay it back. Bastards. And Eric, on principle, did not want to spend on this junk. He bought a new home, and his mother's apartment was not needed for nothing. Just because Jean didn't want to sell it wasn't his problem. And it didn't mean Eric had to shell out the money to fix it up. The woman wasn't going to sit idly by. And the way things had turned out, it was the perfect excuse to get the money she needed. Jean had no doubt that her sister-in-law would get the money. People like her dig with their noses. But they'll get their way. Go to the bank, get a loan, she said, breaking the silence between them. I don't care. And at the same time to get a job, because not bad so settled on the neck of my Eric. You don't work, you don't raise your son? The boy's with me all the time. You will start to do something, if of course you want to keep the family. Finishing her tea, her mother-in-law declined, and Madison returned to her lover Greg's room, who by now was sitting fully clothed on the bed, perplexed. No, well, did you hear that? Exclaimed the girl indignantly. What an insolent woman. It's just lawlessness. And after all, always from herself so good and decent built, but in fact unscrupulous and unprincipled. A blackmailer. What am I supposed to do now? Where am I supposed to get such money? Should I steal it? This is out of the question. It's a nightmare. Greg didn't understand what was being said, as he hadn't heard Madison's conversation with her mother-in-law. But when his mistress brought him up to speed, the man had a plan, and a very cruel one at that, listening to which even Madison with her cynicism was a little confused. Don't be in a hurry to refuse, Greg said. You'd better think about my offer. We'll kill a lot of birds with one stone. We'll give your mother-in-law money for repairs, and you can leave your husband at any time. That's what you want, isn't it? If you didn't want a baby, you'd be hanging out with me right now. No, divorcing Eric and marrying Greg were not in Madison's plans at all. She was happy with the status quo, one man for life, another for bed. It was the way many married women lived, and she was no exception. Madison didn't want to get involved in such a risky venture with her lover, but only until she realized with horror that she had no choice but to heed Greg's advice and put his plan into action. Turning to credit organizations was absurd. Who would give a loan to someone who was unemployed? A quick and easy way to make money was the only way Madison could solve her problem, and after a few days she realized that she simply had no other choice but to accept. What are you so worried about? Greg reassured his mistress. You don't even have to do anything. I'll do everything myself. You, most importantly, agreed with your mom. Will she agree to help you? Of course she will, Madison sighed. Where's she supposed to go? On that But Madison had no proof that her mother-in-law had anything to do with it, and she could hardly keep from hurling accusations at her. Eric was due back from another business trip any day now, and Jean was afraid to imagine what would happen when he found out. Madison was hysterical, smearing mascara on her face from her tear-stained eyes, wailing, wondering what to do next. We have to call Eric right away, she insisted. We can't wait, and what if they do something to the baby in the meantime? Tell him to come back from his business trip immediately. We have to pay, or I risk losing my son. We can't let that happen. Jean insisted on waiting for Eric to return. The police are in charge of this case, she argued. There's no way we can pay the ransom. Maybe the police could find something, get a lead on something. After all, we weren't walking in a field, we were in a playground in the middle of apartment buildings. Somebody must have seen us. Right? The cops have already started a search. Wait to see if there's any news. But Madison needed a ransom, so she played out another terrifying episode. Greg called her on Messenger at his mistress's request, and showing her a video of a bound Braden, mouth taped shut, rambling menacingly. No police. If you report anywhere, I'll finish the kid. Bring the money tomorrow. I've got the address. That's it. Come on, why? It was impossible to recognize the man. He was dressed all in black, wearing a mask with slits for eyes. Greg's voice had been altered by a computer program. Immediately after the call, Madison continued her feigned hysteria. "Don't you see?" she sobbed. "They know everything about us. They know everything about us. We have to call Eric right now. There's no other way out. We have to give them the money, or Braden's dead." Madison frantically dialed her husband's number and told him everything, and Eric left everything to rush into town. On the way, he contacted Anthony Adams and, stammering, explained the situation. The chief immediately suspected something wrong and asked him not to do anything until he arrived. "Don't you understand?" Anthony Adams asked, looking at Eric trembling with fear. "Is everything here sewn up with white threads?" Anthony Adams arrived at Eric's apartment before the man could even get up. Anthony Adams, like Jean, knew what was going on. Eric, on the other hand, didn't realize what he was supposed to realize. "I sense that your wife is not the only one involved," Anthony Adams said openly, and was immediately confronted with a wave of indignation. "What are you talking about?" Eric was outraged. "How could you? What does Madison have to do with this? Aren't you saying that she organized the kidnapping of her own son?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Anthony nodded. "I've been doing some digging into her background, and I want to tell you that I found a lot of interesting things. I'll give it to you sometime. You can read it at your leisure." At that moment, Eric was hardly aware of reality, and was completely unable to adequately perceive any information, especially that concerning his wife. It seemed to him that Anthony was delusional and would take back his words at the first opportunity. But Anthony Adams wasn't going to do that. "If you don't mind, I'm going up with you," he said. "I'm sure it would be best if we could work this out together, especially since you can hardly do without my help." And Eric didn't care. Not at all. The only thing he cared about at that moment was where his son was and what about him. As they sobbed uncontrollably, Madison handed her husband a ransom note and told him about the kidnapper's call. Anthony Adams confirmed his suspicions. Jean remained silent. She could see how depressed her son was, who was ready to run to the bank to order the necessary amount of money. "We'll pay," Eric said firmly. "As much as they say, just to get Braden back. I have one son and I don't need him. And money is nothing. I'll make more money." When he found out the mother had gone to the police, he was very angry. "Why did you do it?" Eric exclaimed. "Who asked you to do that? You have to go and get your statement now. Don't you understand? They could kill Braden. Or don't you care how you got that idea?" "I did it before I knew about the visitor's note," Jean muttered confusedly. "But if you insist, which is fine, I'll take back my statement now. I'll say that Braden was found, ran away, lost. He was picked up by some random passerby walking his dog. And he's home now, and he's home now, and he's perfectly fine." "So stop," Anthony Adams intervened in the conversation, who was beginning to be annoyed by this circus. "Nobody's going anywhere. That's clear. We'll give the money to them, get Braden back, and then we'll figure out what's what." The man was a man of action, and as soon as he and Eric went to the bank, he offered to plant counterfeit money on the kidnappers. "I printed a whole bunch of them," once he laughed. "Just for laughs, and to test my skills. The bills were in the safe, and I never used them. But it turned out to be useful. Who knew?" Eric was not laughing at that moment, and he sincerely did not understand what Anthony was so happy. "Your crazy idea, of course I refuse," said the man. "I have one son, and God forbid anything should happen to him. No one will give him back to me. So no such jokes. We'll go to the bank right now. I'll order the money, and then we'll take it to where the kidnappers said. They're going to give me my Braden back." "I don't believe it," sighed Anthony Adams, who had no intention of backing down. Anthony continued to convince Eric to do what he had in mind. Anthony Adams was confident that Braden was in no danger. Do you want me to contact a man who can find your son in a matter of hours? He offered. You sure you can do that? You want me to promise you the boy will be fine. Anthony Adams knew Madison's background. His mom and his brother and sister. He knew that's where Braden had been taken. There was nowhere else to go. It was unlikely Madison had hired some professional thugs to keep the kid in a dark basement. The mother was in total need of money, so it was highly likely she would have agreed to this adventure, knowing that Eric was willing to do absolutely anything for her son's sake. Let's go for a ride, Anthony Adams suggested. What have we got to lose? Let's go and see what's going on. If Braden isn't there, well, then we'll figure out what to do next. But I'm pretty sure your wife took the boy to his mother, who also decided to make a quick and easy buck and help her daughter stage the kidnapping. Eric didn't want to believe any of this nonsense. He couldn't believe that his wife was capable of such a thing. The man refused until the last, justifying himself by saying that he did not want to risk the life and health of his son. But in the end, Anthony Adams managed to persuade him. All right, let's go, he agreed. Only if something happens to my son. You do realize that if your assumptions are wrong, I could lose my child. Yes, I understand everything. Anthony Adams waved away, who was absolutely certain he was right. He had already contacted his security chief. My boys are coming with us, the man said. We'll pick them up now. Eric couldn't believe this was all happening to him. It wasn't until they actually found Braden at Betty's that the man had to face the harsh reality. Bursting into a small apartment located in a cottage, Anthony Adams and his guys immediately took the woman in a turn. And she didn't hide her grandson at all. The daughter asked me to help, so she did. But is that a crime, the woman wondered. I'm Braden's grandmother, and he can stay with me. As unfortunate as it was, Madison could indeed get away with it. Unless, of course, it could be proven that Greg had demanded the money from Eric. Anthony Adams had been too heavy-handed and head-on. After the father and his boss had taken Braden away from Betty, the woman had called her daughter immediately. Ladies, whispered Madison, who had no choice but to run out into the stairwell. When she saw her mother's cell phone number pop up on the screen, I'm listening to you. What's wrong? Quit your adventure, Betty whispered. Her husband just arrived with some men. I don't know how they got my address and guessed I had Braden, but they took your son. God, Madison, why did I even get involved in this? I mean, we could go to jail. What about the kids? Do you have any idea what's going to happen to them? Your Greg's idea was completely absurd. You're on your own now. Betty agreed to help her daughter just for the money. Madison had promised a substantial sum of money for her to take Braden in for a while. What are you guys up to? The woman asked excitedly. Why would you drag a baby all the way out here? A several-hour car ride. Mommy, it's the way it has to be, Madison replied. Can't you just help me? Madison didn't go into details. She only told me briefly, assuring me that everything would be okay. And that's how it turned out. Her mother knew about her daughter's relationship with Greg and didn't understand her at all. It would have been fine if you'd traded your Eric for some wealthy man, the woman reasoned. But who did you get involved with? That beggarly bastard. He was a fool, and he's still a fool. No good will ever come of him. So you're wasting your time with your husband. If he finds out, it'll be bad for you and your son. Madison was less interested in Braden's fate than in her own well-being. When her mother had told her that their whole adventure had been discovered, Madison had been terrified. What's going to happen now? Madison lamented. She contacted Greg. Would Eric put me with his son? Don't worry about it, grinned the grief-stricken lover, who had no doubt they'd get away with it. They'll never prove anything in their lives. So they ran your address, got your background, found Braden. So you went to your grandmother's house. What's the big deal? You won't get the money, which means you won't be able to pay off your mother-in-law. What mother-in-law? Madison was furious. What are you talking about? Eric's gonna divorce me anyway. It's over. How can you not see that? There was no doubt about it. Eric came home very angry, and without even saying hello, asked his mother to take Braden for a walk while he talked to his wife. Anthony Adams did not accompany him, thinking it would be embarrassing already. Well, he smiled. I'm glad you've finally seen the light. I warned you, and as you can see, my intuition was right. Good luck to you. I'll see you at work. Me and the guys are going on vacation. Madison could tell by the look on Eric's face that nothing good was in store for her. She'd never seen her husband so angry. Well, he said, looking intently into his wife's eyes, let's not put our conversation on hold. Eric literally flooded Madison with questions about the family and everything else, but most importantly, about Braden. How could you? He wondered. He's your son. He's not just mine, he's yours. And you. I can't even imagine how I could be so wrong about you. I hope you realize I won't let you anywhere near my son now. If you think you're going to get off scot-free, you're not. You know how much Braden means to me and how much I love him. He's the most precious thing I have. I loved you too. I loved you too. I loved you so much. But as it turns out, you betrayed me. And you did it so stupidly. Did you really think what you were planning would go away? I'm not a complete fool. And I'm not surrounded by idiots. The same Anthony Adams. I mean, he knew what you were right away. I'm the one who's a fool for believing you. And you're the one who didn't. Madison realized that she had nothing to lose, and decided to tell her husband what prompted her to this stupid and reckless act. Listen to me, Eric, she exclaimed. I think you should know about this. It was your mother. If she hadn't started blackmailing me and demanding money, none of this would have happened. I'm sorry, but I just can't keep quiet. It's too much. So Madison told her husband, hoping to drive a wedge between her and Jean. Eric, however, resented his wife for taking it out on his mother. What does she have to do with this? He resented. How dare you accuse her of anything? And you tell me about all this as if nothing happened. You also cheated on me, that is, betrayed me. And it's my mother's fault. Well, of course, who else would it be? Eric couldn't take his wife's words adequately. Later, when things had settled down a few days later, Madison had no choice but to leave home that same day and temporarily move back in with her mother and brother and sister. She had some money to rent an apartment. But before she could start a new life, Madison needed to process everything that had happened. She couldn't get her head around the fact that Eric had figured her out so quickly, and she and Greg and Betty wouldn't get a dime. Eric was going to have a separate and very serious conversation with Jean. If what Madison had said was true, it was another low blow. So besides his wife, his mother had betrayed him. And that wasn't an easy thing to get over. Oh my God, son, how could you think such a thing? Jean wailed when Eric asked her directly if Madison was telling the truth. I didn't mean it. I couldn't even imagine that she would come up with something like that. Eric realized that he was partly to blame for what had happened to his son. If he'd agreed to pay for his mother's repairs, it wouldn't have occurred to her to blackmail her daughter-in-law. But cheating was a very mean thing to do. And Eric couldn't understand why his mother hid the fact of his wife's infidelity from him. Why are you doing this to me? Did you have the decency to hide the fact that Madison was cheating on me? Bringing a lover into our apartment and having fun with him in our marital bed? Son, but I meant well. Jean sighed bitterly. I didn't want to destroy your family, since you chose Madison and she gave birth to your son. Then it was meant to be, fate had decreed it. I had no right to interfere. I was hoping that after this she'd come to her senses, get a job. After all, she wasn't doing anything good. But instead of coming to her senses, she faked her son's kidnapping. How was I supposed to know she was capable of that? I guess Braden was the only good thing left in Eric's life after everything that had happened. His mother and his wife had treated him like scum. and he loved them so dearly. But he decided not to litigate or file a complaint. He would just divorce Madison and help Jean with the repairs. She was finally able to tell Eric why she'd resisted selling the apartment. And after that, everything fell into place. Eric was a big dreamer. After listening to his mother, he immediately started building barricades in his head and inventing secrets, which made Jean smile skeptically. "Son," she grinned, "do you really think that if we take apart the old rubble, we'll find something we don't know about? Do you believe it yourself?" That's the thing Eric did. That's why he decided to give his mother money from his savings for the repairs. If Jean hadn't told him about his late grandmother's instructions, he never would have agreed to renovate this wreck. That's how many months of life and wasted time to remove debris, replace wiring. Flooring will take at least 3 months, and you have to supervise the workers. And who better than Eric to do all that? Who else will help his mother if not his beloved only son? Eric didn't know what to do. So much had happened in his life lately. Not so long ago he was absolutely happy and could not even imagine that everything would turn out this way. First of all, the man had to deal. "We've already got 7 of us. How are you going to raise your son on your own? You figure it out. Leave Braden to Eric. You're still young, you'll find happiness." For Madison, happiness was about money and freedom. She'd learned that during her years of marriage. Her son was a burden. She didn't want to spend her life raising him, so she agreed to Eric's proposal. After that, Eric began to repair the apartment of Jean's mother, with whom he had little contact. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forgive her for taking part in the adventure. Jean understood everything and hoped that Eric would cool down and accept everything that had happened. Most importantly, Madison had disappeared from Eric's life. That was something that Jean was very happy about. Despite the guilt she felt, she realized that it was for the best. If she hadn't caught Madison with her lover and offered to pay her off, Eric might have lived a lifetime of lies. Now, despite the loss, her son had a chance to build a real relationship. That was gratifying, especially since the money lost in the divorce was more than recouped in the most unexpected way. It turned out that Alexandra Georgia, not in vain, asked her daughter not to sell the apartment. The woman had one secret. Soon after the renovation began, mother and son discovered something that made them have to urgently dismiss the workers. They couldn't let either of them know the contents of the stash, which was deep in the wall. As soon as Eric, who had taken some time off to supervise the repairs, saw some strange door, he immediately informed the workers that they could rest temporarily. "How come?" marveled one of them. "We've only just begun." "You'll continue later," replied Eric, who was confident that he could open the hiding place on his own. He immediately called his mother, who was temporarily living with Braden in his apartment. Jean had nowhere else to go during the renovation, and Eric, deep down, was glad to have his mother around. Otherwise, who would take care of Madison's son? She was no longer with them, and never would be. Jean rushed to the apartment with her grandson. By then, Eric had already opened the stash and was sitting on the dirty floor, reading some old dusty notebook and going through some gold jewelry. "Mother of God," Jean exclaimed when she saw it all. "What the hell is this?" It turned out that Alexandra Georgia was not so simple as she seemed at first sight, and had made quite a substantial fortune during her life, which, however, she had not been able to use, for she had received all this gold as gifts from her numerous cavaliers. That was what it was called at the time. No one would ever dare to talk about anything like that openly. For many years, the woman kept both silence and gold, which during the renovation of the apartment she hid in a special cache made by the hands of her spouse. It turns out that Dad knew about all this, Jean muttered confusedly, going through the gold jewelry and reading the lines of her mother's personal diary, which she also put in the stash and did not take out for many years. "Well, Grandma's got it going on," muttered Eric, who was in complete shock at the find. Jean shared her son's feelings completely. Like him, she couldn't believe what she had just read. It was beyond her usual reality of right and wrong and all kinds of principles, and the woman didn't know how to feel about it. Though on the other hand, what did it all matter anyway? Her mother was long since in the grave, and Jean knew so little of her past that it was certainly not her place to judge or condemn Alexandra Georgia. She had done what she thought was right, and no one had the right to point a finger at her, especially not after her death. The question before Eric was what to do with all this now. Grandmother was trying for the future, including his future. She also wanted her children and grandchildren to live richly after her death, which was written in her diary. But it will not be possible to realize it here, he reasoned. Firstly, there is too much gold, and secondly, there are rare and very interesting specimens which can be very valuable. His grandmother's admirers were high-ranking people, and these gifts could be used very profitably. Eric realized that if he sold the entire contents of the small chest, the money would be enough for the rest of his life. Not that he wanted to quit his job and parasitize on everything. It was just that it was a pretty decent capital for the future. And first of all, the man thought not of himself, but of his son, for whom he wanted to provide a good start, so that Braden would not have to break through the wall for career and money. And except for Anthony Adams, Eric had no one else to consult with. He was the only one who could come up with a good idea. And only the chief had such extensive connections, with the help of which the received gold could be converted into big money without the risk of getting into serious trouble with the law. Of course, Eric had offered him a share, as he was convinced it was the right thing to do. But Anthony Adams refused and, laughing, confessed that he had an offer for Eric that he was sure he couldn't refuse. Just as he had a few years ago, Eric smiled. "What's true is true," nodded Anthony Adams, who also noticed that there was such a resemblance. Anthony Adams had long dreamed of growing his business overseas. He was always striving for more, and was by no means going to stop there. And who but Eric he was to send on a long business trip. "There you live there, and observe everything," the chief reasoned. "Perhaps you'll get the hang of it and won't want to come back, and I'll help you move the wealth overseas. I've got one man who'll do it right." And it was indeed another offer that could not be refused. A change of scenery was the only thing that could help Eric at that moment, and naturally he agreed at once. And after a while, as Anthony Adams expected, he got used to it. Not a year later, as the man began a completely different life, he met his true love, although he put a ban on personal relationships and no longer hoped for anything. Now Eric had everything he could dream of, and really big money, and his own business, which he ran in parallel with the affairs of Anthony Adams, paying tribute for support and help, and a loving wife and mother who had moved in with Braden when Eric finally settled overseas. He never even thought about Madison. But when she found out who Eric had become and how he lived now, she regretted having done that to him. But it was too late to change anything. Those times when Eric had loved her and was willing to do anything for her were irrevocably gone. Now he had a new love. And not a false one, but a real one, fully earned at the cost of betrayal and suffering that could have been avoided if he had opened his eyes a little earlier to the woman who had always been by his side.